There is a moment at the end of almost every episode of Gravity Falls where a string of symbols flashes across the screen for a few seconds, and most people just let it scroll past on the way to the next thing. Here is what almost nobody stops to notice in that moment. It is a real code. Somebody sat down and encrypted an actual English sentence by hand using a genuine cipher and did it 40 times over, once at the end of every single episode, and hid the whole thing inside a Disney cartoon about two kids and their summer. Tonight, we are going through all of it, the entire intelligence of this strange little show, the geniuses and the con men, and the demon who is certain he is smarter than every mortal in the room, and the quiet codes tucked into the corners where you were never really supposed to look. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, let your eyes go soft, and if you have not subscribed to Pine Hat yet, it honestly does help us keep making these. Let's begin at the beginning, softly. Because the first clever thing about Gravity Falls is not a character at all. It is the shape of the thing itself. On the surface, and I mean the surface you would see if you wandered past a television while somebody else was watching, this looks like exactly what Disney was selling it as. Two 12-year-old twins, Dipper and Mabel Pines, get shipped off to spend their summer in a dusty little tourist trap of a town in Oregon with their great uncle, a man they call Grunkle Stan, who runs a roadside attraction called the Mystery Shack. There are bright colors and a talking pig and a lot of jokes about how weird the town is. If you only ever glanced at it, you would file it next to 100 other kids' cartoons and forget it by dinner. That misreading is not an accident. It is the trap the whole series is built on. Alex Hirsch, the man who created it, designed the entire run as a mystery box, a story that hides its real self one careful layer under the cartoon. And the genius of that construction is that it trusts you. It trusts a child watching after school, and it trusts an adult half paying attention, and it trusts the obsessive who's going to freeze frame every single background, and it feeds all three of them at once without ever telling any of them which layer they are standing on. Think about what that actually requires. Most stories, especially most stories made for children, are built to be understood on the first pass. They hand you the meaning. Gravity Falls does something much stranger and much more respectful. It builds a surface that works completely on its own, a funny summer adventure that never stops being a funny summer adventure. And then it buries a second story underneath, a melancholy one about family and time running out, and a man who spent 30 years lying to everyone he loved. And under that, it buries a third layer, a genuine puzzle written in real cryptography that you have to sit down with a pen and paper to read. The remarkable thing, the thing I find myself returning to, is that none of those layers cancels the others out. A 7-year-old can love this cartoon and never know the bottom layer exists. A grown adult can spend a decade decoding it and never feel like they were watching a kid's show. That is not luck, that is architecture, and it is the single most intelligent decision anyone made in the entire production, before we ever get to a single genius character inside the story. Gravity Falls also does something with its own information that is worth pausing on because it quietly teaches you how to watch it. Very early on, it establishes that this world has hidden depth that rewards attention. There is a book, one of a set of journals, that Dipper finds out in the woods, and that book has notes written in invisible ink that only show up under ultraviolet light. And that little detail, a page that looks blank until you shine the right kind of light on it, is really the whole series explaining its own rules to you in miniature. Everything here has a hidden version. Every blank page has writing on it if you know how to look. The town is not weird by accident. The background is not decoration, and the credits are not just credits. From almost the first episode, you are being trained to distrust the surface and go looking for the layer underneath. And once that habit takes hold, the story never stops rewarding it. That is a rare kind of confidence in an audience, and it is why people who fell in love with all this as children were still decoding it as adults years after it ended. It is worth being honest right at the start about what kind of intelligence we are actually going to be talking about across this whole long night, because Gravity Falls is unusually precise about it. There is more than one way to be smart here, and the series never pretends they are the same thing. There is book intelligence, the raw academic firepower that one character in particular has, in almost unbelievable quantities. There is deductive intelligence, the detective's habit of taking small clues and building them into a solved mystery, which belongs mostly to the boy. There is street intelligence, the con man's read on people, the ability to look at a mark and know exactly what lie they want to be told, which belongs to the old man behind the counter. There is emotional intelligence, The far quieter and far more underrated ability to understand what a person actually needs, which belongs, and this matters, to the girl the story is always tempting you to underestimate. And then there is the intelligence of the villain, pure manipulation, the mind that treats every other mind in the room as a lock to be picked. The reason all of this feels so much smarter than it has any right to be is that it holds those 5 kinds of intelligence in its hands at once, and it is genuinely curious about which one wins, and the answer it eventually gives is not the one you would expect walking in. But we will get there. We have all night, and there is no hurry at all. So let me set the frame we are going to keep returning to. Gravity Falls aired on Disney Channel and Disney XD from the summer of 2012 to the winter of 2016, 2 seasons, 40 episodes, and it ended not because anyone canceled it, but because Alex Hirsch decided the story was over and chose to end it on his own terms. That fact alone tells you something about the intelligence behind the thing. This was a planned object. It had a shape from the beginning, a destination it was walking toward the whole time, which is why so many of the clues planted in the earliest episodes pay off in the very last ones. When you go back and rewatch it, knowing where it lands, those first episodes stop looking like a light little cartoon finding its feet and start looking like a magician showing you the coin before the trick begins. The smartest moments in this story are not only the ones where a character outthinks another character, they are the moments where the whole thing outthinks you, quietly, weeks or seasons in advance, and waits, patient and completely calm for you to catch up. So let us stay with those codes for a while because they really are the purest example of the intelligence at work here, the layer that most fully rewards the kind of viewer who refuses to let the surface be the whole story. Every episode of Gravity Falls ends the same way. The story finishes, the credits roll, and in the final seconds, a jumble of letters or numbers or little symbols appears on the screen, and it is gone almost before you register it. Alex Hirsch has been clear that these coded messages are real, that they are encrypted with actual cipher techniques, and that every one of them decodes to a meaningful sentence in English. He did not sprinkle random characters on the screen to look mysterious. He wrote sentences, and then he enciphered them 40 times over and trusted that somebody out there would care enough to undo the work. And people did. There is a whole quiet community of viewers who treated those few seconds of screen time as the most important part of the episode. What makes it genuinely clever, and not just a gimmick, is that the codes get harder as the series goes on. They teach you. They start you off gently, and then, once they trust that you have learned the basic moves, they raise the difficulty, and the progression is a real one that a person could learn cryptography from if they wanted to. Let me walk you through it slowly, the way you would want it explained late at night, because the ideas are simple even when the names sound intimidating. The first 6 episodes use what is called a Caesar cipher. This is the oldest trick in the book, named for Julius Caesar, who really did use it to hide his military messages. The idea could not be simpler. You take every letter and you shift it a fixed number of steps along the alphabet. In these credits, the shift is 3, so to read the message, you take each letter you see and step back 3 places to find the letter it really stands for. That is the whole method. A becomes the letter 3 along, and to undo it, you count 3 back. It is the sort of thing you can do in your head once you get the rhythm of it. And I think that is deliberate because it is the on-ramp. It is the cipher that says, come in, you can do this, it is not as hard as it looks. Then from the 7th episode through the 13th, it switches to an @bash cipher. This one is even older than Caesar, with roots in ancient Hebrew scribal tradition. And the idea is beautiful in its simplicity. You mirror the alphabet. A trades places with Z, B trades places with Y, C with X, and so on inward, until the whole alphabet folds over on itself in the middle. There is no shifting to count, no number to remember. You just flip the alphabet end for end and read what falls out. What I like about going to @bash second is that it is not harder than Caesar exactly, it is different, and switching between them forces the solver to stop and ask which tool they are even holding. A cryptographer's instincts are being built quietly in whoever is bothering to play along. From the 14th episode to the 19th, it changes again, this time to a cipher called A1Z26, and the name tells you exactly what it is. You number the letters. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, all the way to Z, which is 26. So instead of letters on the screen, you are suddenly looking at strings of numbers, and to read them, you convert each number back into its letter. It looks completely different from the 2 that came before. And that visual jolt, letters becoming numbers, is part of the fun, because a newcomer stumbling on it for the first time has no idea it is even the same kind of puzzle until they sit with it. And then comes the 20th episode, the one that closes the first season, and here the writing shows off a little, in the best way. For that finale, it combines the ciphers. It layers A1Z26 and @bash and Caesar together, so that undoing the message means undoing several transformations in the right order, peeling the thing like an onion. It is a graduation exam. It is the series turning to the small group of people who have kept up all season and saying, all right, you have learned the 3 basic moves, now prove you can use them together. And after that graduation, for the entire second season, every episode from the 21st onward, it moves to the hardest of the lot, the keyed Visionaire Cipher. The Visionaire deserves a slow moment because for centuries it was considered essentially unbreakable, and it earned a nickname that translates to the indecipherable cipher. Here is the idea, gently. A plain Caesar shift, the very first cipher we talked about, has one fatal weakness, which is that every letter is shifted by the same amount, so if you can figure out the shift for one letter, you have cracked the whole message. The Visionaire fixes that by using not one shift but many, driven by a secret keyword. You write your keyword over and over above your message, and each letter of the keyword tells you how far to shift the letter beneath it. So the first letter might be shifted by a lot, the second by a little, the third by something in between, and the pattern only repeats as often as the keyword does. Without knowing the keyword, you are almost helpless, and that is exactly why it was saved for last, and why every second season episode got its own new keyword so that solving one did not hand you the next. By the end, the credits cryptogram was no longer a warm-up. It was a real cryptographic challenge hidden at the end of a cartoon. And I find something almost moving in the fact that nobody ever slowed down to explain any of this on screen. It just trusted that the right person would find it. And the payoff of all that work is that the messages themselves matter. This is the part that lifts the cipher game from a clever trick to something close to storytelling. Some of the decoded lines are just jokes or friendly asides, little notes from the creators to the people patient enough to read them. But some of them are real clues. One famous decoded message planted early, when the audience still thought Grunkle Stan was nothing more than a grumpy old huckster, reads that Stan is not what he seems. That message sat there, in the credits, in code, for anyone who bothered to solve it, long before it was ever confirmed on screen that the old man was hiding an enormous secret. The clue to one of the biggest twists was available to you the whole time, if you were willing to do the work, and almost nobody was. Another early line simply welcomes you to Gravity Falls. And when Gideon, the villain of the first season, was reaching for power in the season finale, the coded message spoke of a prophecy being fulfilled. The most hidden layer of the story was whispering its own future to you. I should be careful here because the exact wording of a lot of these individual messages varies, and I'm not going to sit here and recite the ones I cannot confirm because inventing a cipher solution would be exactly the kind of confident mistake this whole enterprise is built to avoid. But the pattern is the point, and the pattern is verified, and it is remarkable. A children's cartoon planted a solvable clue to its central mystery in genuine cryptography, and then waited, without comment, for its audience to grow up smart enough to read it. That is the single smartest design feature of Gravity Falls, and it happens in the 4 or 5 seconds most people never even look at. Now let us come down out of the credits and into the story itself and meet the first genuinely clever mind inside it, which belongs to a 12-year-old boy. Dipper Pines arrives in Gravity Falls as an anxious, overprepared, deeply serious child, the kind of kid who has clearly spent his whole short life feeling a step behind and has decided the answer is to know more than everyone around him. And very early in his summer, out in the woods, he finds the thing that will define his entire arc. He finds a book. It is one of the journals, a leather-bound volume with a 6-fingered hand printed on the cover and a number 3 inside it. And it is packed with handwritten notes and diagrams cataloging every strange and dangerous thing hiding in the town. The book was written by someone the story only ever calls the author, and it becomes, for Dipper, part field guide and part obsession, the object he carries everywhere and consults like scripture. What I love about the way Dipper is handled is that the journal never does his thinking for him. It would have been easy and lazy to make the book an oracle, a thing he flips open to find the answer to every problem. Instead, the journal is more like a partner that is always slightly out of date. It tells him what a creature is, but not what this particular creature is about to do. It warns him of a danger, but leaves the escape up to him. So Dipper's intelligence is not the intelligence of someone who has the answer key. It is the intelligence of a detective, someone who takes fragments, a note here, a symptom there, a pattern nobody else noticed, and assembles them into a conclusion under pressure, usually while something with too many teeth is chasing him. The very first monsters he faces, the gnomes who seem harmless and turn out to be anything but, set the template. The threat looks like one thing, the journal gives him a piece of the truth, and he has to close the gap between what the book knows and what is actually happening in front of him with his own reasoning. And his reasoning is real. There is a scene deep in the second season where Dipper works his way into a hidden bunker in the woods, a place built by the author himself, and the sequence is essentially a test of deduction, a series of puzzles and traps that only yield to someone who can think the way the author thought. Dipper gets through it, not by luck, but by inhabiting another mind, by asking himself what a brilliant, paranoid, careful person would have done, and following that logic to the door. That is a specific and unusual thing to dramatize in a cartoon, the act of solving a puzzle by modeling the mind of the person who made it. And it tells you his intelligence is being taken seriously as a real tool and not just a character trait. But the single deepest expression of Dipper's mind is not any one monster or trap. It is the question that drives him through the entire series, which is simply, who wrote this book? Everything else is a distraction from that central mystery for him. He wants to know who the author is, where he went, and why he left 3 journals scattered and hidden across a small town in Oregon. And the reason this matters, the reason it is more than a plot engine, is that Dipper is, without quite realizing it, searching for a version of himself. The author turns out to be a man who was, at Dipper's age, exactly like Dipper, a lonely, brilliant, obsessive kid who trusted his own mind more than he trusted other people, and who followed his curiosity into genuine danger. When Dipper finally learns who the author is, the mystery is not the only thing resolving. A boy is being shown his own possible future, the good and the frightening of it, and asked whether that is really who he wants to become. That is the part of Dipper's cleverness people undersell. It is not just that he can solve things, it is that his need to solve things is the engine of half the plot. And there is a quiet question folded into it about whether that need is a gift or a kind of trap. There is a wonderful tension the writers keep returning to, which is that Dipper's greatest strength and his greatest weakness are the same thing. His mind never turns off. He cannot let a mystery lie, cannot walk past a locked door, cannot accept that some questions might be better left unopened, and again that hunger leads him and the people he loves into real danger. He is the one who keeps pulling on the thread, and the writing is remarkably even-handed about it. It clearly admires him, clearly finds his brilliance the beating heart of half its plots, and it also, again and again, shows you the cost of a mind that will not stop pushing. He is 12, and he is already the kind of person who will trade his own safety for an answer, and the story loves him and worries about him in exactly equal measure. That balance, admiration, and worry held together without either one winning is one of the most emotionally intelligent things done with any character here, and it is done with the one who's supposed to be the pure brain of the group. There is a detail here I keep turning over. For all his deduction, for all the mysteries he cracks, the biggest secret in Dipper's own house sits under his nose for most of 2 seasons, and he does not solve it. The old man he lives with is hiding something enormous, and the boy detective, the one who can reason his way through a bunker built by a genius, does not see it, because it is too close, because you do not investigate the people you love, because the whole point of a con run on family is that the mark is the last to know. There is something quietly humbling in that, and I think Hirsch knows exactly what he's doing by letting his little Sherlock miss the one mystery that was in the room with him the entire time. Which brings us naturally to the man who was hiding it, because if Dipper is the brain in the classical sense, the reasoning, deducing, book-learning kind of mind, then his great-uncle Stan is the other kind of intelligence entirely, and for a long time you are allowed to underestimate him exactly the way everyone in the story does. Grunkle Stan presents himself as a cheap, grumpy, money-grubbing old huckster who runs a tourist trap full of obvious fakes. The Mystery Shack is a barn full of taxidermy nonsense and cardboard monsters, and Stan charges gullible tourists to gawk at it, and overcharges them for a keychain on the way out. He fudges the books, he ropes his own great-nephew and Suze, the handyman, into unpaid labor, He lies with a straight face and a con man's total lack of shame. On a first watch, he reads as comic relief, the stingy old crank whose only real skill is separating a fool from his money. But that skill, the more you look at it, is not a minor thing. It is a whole form of intelligence, and it is arguably the most practically useful mind in the story. Stan can read a person in a glance. He knows what a mark wants to believe before the mark knows it himself, and he knows how to sell it to them. He is quick on his feet in a way none of the book smart characters are, able to improvise a lie under pressure, keep 3 stories straight at once, and talk his way out of a corner that would leave a genius stammering. There is a reason he keeps getting dropped into situations where raw intellect fails and cunning wins. When you are cornered by something that cannot be reasoned with, you do not want the boy with the journal. You want the old man who has spent a lifetime learning that the truth is negotiable and confidence is a weapon. His intelligence is social and adaptive and completely unpretentious, and Gravity Falls clearly respects it because it keeps letting him win. And I have to name the con at the center of everything because it recolors every cheap grift you watched him pull in the early episodes. For most of the run, you think Stan operates the Mystery Shack for the reason any huckster runs a scam, to make money. He is greedy, you think, a small-time crook who found a small-time racket. And then the rug comes out and you learn that the entire Mystery Shack, the whole ridiculous tourist trap, is a front. It is cover. Every dollar he squeezed out of a tourist, every fake exhibit, every day he spent playing the harmless old fraud, was in service of a secret so large and so patient that it reframes the man completely. Stan was not hiding petty theft behind the shack. He was hiding a 30-year project underneath it, and he was hiding it from everyone, including the family living in his house, including the boy detective upstairs whose entire personality is solving mysteries. We will come to what that project actually was because it deserves its own long stretch of the night, but for now sit with the sheer scale of the deception. This man ran a con on the whole world and on the people he loved most for 3 decades without ever once slipping, and he did it while playing the part of a buffoon so convincingly that even the audience fell for it. That is not the work of a fool. That is a con of almost unimaginable discipline, and the disguise was the fact that he let you think he was stupid. That is the genuinely brilliant trick pulled with Stan, and it is one you can only pull once. It weaponizes your own snobbery, because we are trained, all of us, to rank book smarts over street smarts, to assume the man who reads the ancient text is cleverer than the man who sells you a fake ticket to see it. Gravity Falls leans on that bias hard, spends a season and a half letting you look down on Stan as the least intelligent Pines, and then reveals that he was the one running the longest and most sophisticated operation in the entire story right under your nose. The greedy old con man was the sharpest practical mind in town the whole time, and the proof of his intelligence is precisely that you did not notice it. A dumb man cannot pretend to be dumb convincingly, only a very sharp one can. There is also, and I do not want to lose this, a moral intelligence buried in Stan that surfaces slowly, and it is different from his cunning. Underneath the grifter is a man who has made enormous sacrifices, who gave up his own name and his own life and let everyone believe he was someone else, all in service of family. His cunning is in service of loyalty, and that combination, the con man's mind pointed at love rather than profit, is what turns him from a comic figure into the emotional center of the whole thing. The scam was real. The greed was partly a mask over something much more painful. When you rewatch the early episodes, knowing what he is really doing with all that money and all those lies, the grumpy old huckster becomes almost unbearably poignant. A man performing worthlessness so that no one will look too closely at the most important thing he has ever done. That is the smartest kind of hiding there is, and he did it in plain sight behind a cash register for 30 years. The thing that gets me about Stan, the thing people miss when they rank the geniuses, is this. The book's smart characters get themselves into terrible trouble precisely because they trust their own brilliance too much. The con man survives again and again because he trusts nobody and nothing, least of all himself, and because he has learned the hard way that being the smartest person in the room is worth nothing if you cannot read the room. Stan's intelligence has scar tissue on it. It was earned out on the street, alone, with nothing. And that is exactly why it holds up when the intelligence built in libraries and laboratories starts to crack under the weight of its own ego. Keep that in the back of your mind as the night goes on, because everything is quietly building toward it. Now we have to talk about the other twin, because Stan is only half of a story, and the other half is the smartest man in Gravity Falls in the purely academic sense, his brother, Stanford Pines, the one everyone calls Ford. He is the author. He is the mind behind the journals Dipper has been carrying around all season, the six-fingered hand on the cover, the genius who cataloged every anomaly in the town before either of the kids was born. And when you finally meet him properly, he is not softened into a lovable professor. You get a real intelligence, with all the sharpness and all the damage that a mind like that tends to carry. The scale of Ford's brilliance is almost comic. According to the supporting material, the journals, and the fandom's careful reading of them, he holds 12 doctorates. I want to flag that gently because it is the kind of number that lives more in the journals and the supplements than in any single line of dialogue, so I will say it the way it should be said, that he is reported to hold 12 PhDs, an academic record that borders on the absurd, and that he earned them at a pace that left his peers behind. He finished his undergraduate work and at least one doctorate years ahead of where a normal student would be. But the number is not really the point. The point is the shape of his mind, which is the shape of a person who was always, from earliest childhood, the cleverest mind in every room he entered, and never entirely comfortable there. And his origin story is, for my money, one of the quietly devastating turns in the whole series, because it is a tragedy built entirely out of intelligence and accident. As a boy, Ford built a perpetual motion machine for the school science fair. Now, a perpetual motion machine is, in the real world, an impossibility, a thing the laws of physics forbid, and that is part of the joke and part of the wonder, that this child built something that should not be able to exist. It was good enough that his principal urged him to apply to West Coast Tech, described as the best technical school in the country. The kind of place where students said they turned science fiction into science fact. This was the door. This was the moment the brilliant, awkward, six-fingered boy was going to escape his small life and go somewhere that would finally value what his mind could do. And the night before it mattered, his own twin brother broke the machine. Not out of malice, or not exactly. It is one of those small, human, catastrophic accidents, the kind that changes everything and that nobody can ever fully take back. When the representatives from West Coast Tech came and saw a perpetual motion machine that was not moving, a broken thing sitting dead on the table, they crossed Ford off their list and left. The door closed, and instead of the best technical school in the country, Ford ended up at a low-ranked place called Backups-Moore University, a school whose name is a joke about being nobody's first choice, and he carried the resentment of that broken machine and the broken future it represented into a rift with his brother that would last for decades. Sit with the irony of that for a moment, because it is the engine of the entire series, and almost nobody frames it this way. The single smartest person in Gravity Falls had his life derailed not by a lack of intelligence, but by an accident of family, by love turning careless for one night. His genius was real, and it was not enough. It could not protect him from a brother's clumsy hands and a closed door. And everything that follows, the whole 30-year tragedy we are going to trace tonight, unspools from that one broken machine. There is a lesson buried in it about the limits of raw intellect that is never said out loud but gets proved over and over. Being brilliant does not save you. It never once saves anybody in this story. That is the most grown-up idea in the whole thing, and it gets planted at a childhood science fair. But Backups-Moore, the school that was supposed to be a humiliation, turns out to matter enormously, and here the writing does something generous, because it is at Backups-Moore that Ford meets Fiddleford McGucket, the fellow genius who becomes his research partner and eventually one of the great tragic figures of the whole story. And it is out of Backups-Moore that Ford, refusing to let the low ranking of his school define him, produces work good enough to win real recognition, a nationally ranked thesis, and a substantial grant, which he uses to move to a strange little town in Oregon where the supernatural seems to pool and concentrate. And there he begins the great work of his life. He begins to study the weirdness of Gravity Falls, and he begins to write it down in numbered journals, in careful diagrams, in invisible ink under ultraviolet light. And that body of work is the thing Dipper will find in the woods years later and treat like a holy text. So when you trace it back, the journals that drive everything, the field guide that keeps a 12-year-old boy alive all summer, exists because a genius was rejected by his dream school, ended up somewhere he considered beneath him, met the exact right partner there, and pointed his enormous unhappy intelligence at the one town weird enough to hold his attention. The smartest moments in Gravity Falls are downstream of the saddest ones. And the thing I find myself sitting with about Ford is that his intelligence is genuine and vast, and also the source of nearly every disaster in his life, because a mind that brilliant and that hungry for answers is exactly the kind of mind that a certain kind of predator can find and flatter and use, which is the door we are about to walk through, because the being that found Ford's genius and turned it into a weapon is the smartest and most dangerous mind in the entire story, and we should meet him carefully. Bill's Cipher is a triangle. That is the joke and the horror of him at once. He looks like something a child would doodle in the margin of a notebook, a floating yellow triangle with a single eye in the middle and a little top hat and a bow tie. And he talks in a jittery, high-pitched, wisecracking voice. And he is, without any real competition, the most intelligent and most frightening thing in Gravity Falls. He is a dream demon, a being who for most of his existence could only exist in the mindscape, the world of dreams and thoughts, and his single overriding goal is to cross out of that world and into ours, to tear down the wall between his nightmare dimension and the waking world and merge the two. And the reason he is the supreme intelligence of the piece is not that he can do magic, though he can. It is that he understands minds. Every mind he meets is a lock, and he has never met a lock he could not eventually pick. His weapon is manipulation, and the writing is careful and specific about how it works, which is what makes him truly unsettling rather than just a cartoon villain. Bill does not usually force anyone to do anything. He talks them into it. He finds the exact thing a person wants most, the wound or the hunger they are least able to resist, and he presses on it until they hand him what he needs of their own free will. And the greatest example, the one that reframes the whole tragedy of the Pines family, is what he did to Ford. Because remember, Ford was a genius, stranded in a small town, brilliant and lonely and desperate to be recognized, carrying the old wound of a dream school that rejected him and a world that never quite valued his mind the way he believed it deserved. And into that exact wound walked Bill Cipher, wearing the mask of a muse. That is the con at the very center of Ford's downfall, and it is a masterpiece of manipulation. Bill presented himself to Ford as a benevolent being, a muse who visits and inspires one brilliant mind each century, and he chose Ford, he said, because Ford's intellect was special enough to deserve it. Think about how perfectly aimed that is. You take the smartest, loneliest man in the region, someone who has spent his whole life feeling unrecognized, and you appear to him as a magical being whose entire purpose is to recognize genius, and you tell him he is the one, the chosen mind of his age. There is almost no version of Ford who could resist that, because it is not really an offer of power. It is an offer of the one thing he has always wanted, which is to be seen and valued for exactly the thing that has always isolated him. Bill did not overpower Ford. He flattered him into building the doorway that would nearly end the world, and he did it by being the perfect answer to a wound he could read at a glance. That is what real manipulation looks like, and it is brave to show it working on the smartest human in the cast, precisely because being smart is no protection against being understood. His other mechanism is the deal. Bill trades. He is, in a sense, the ultimate con man, which sets up a beautiful rhyme with Stan that I do not think is accidental. Because both of them get what they want by understanding what other people want and offering it to them. Bill's deals are sealed with a handshake wreathed in blue flame, and he always offers something the other person badly needs in exchange for something that seems, in the moment, like a smaller price. He offers a laptop's password to someone desperate to open it. He offers the combination to a safe to a boy hungry for what is inside, and the trap is always the same, that the thing he asks for in return is never actually small, because what he usually wants is access, a foothold, a body to borrow, a crack in the door. He deals in exactly the way a predatory lender deals, offering relief now against a cost you do not fully understand until it is far too late. And the people who take his deals are almost never stupid. They are desperate or proud or cornered, and Bill's genius is that he can tell the difference and knows exactly which lever to pull for each one. So if he is that clever, why does he lose? Because one of the very smartest choices in the whole design is to give the smartest villain a single fatal flaw, and the flaw is not a lack of intelligence, it is ego. Bill really cannot conceive that the mortals he treats as toys could outthink him. He is so certain of his own superiority that he stops checking his work. And that overconfidence is the exact crack the Pines family eventually drives a wedge into, though we will save the mechanics of that for the end of the night where they belong. For now, I just want you to hold the shape of it. The most intelligent being in Gravity Falls is undone not by someone smarter, because arguably no one in the cast is smarter than Bill in raw terms, but by his inability to imagine that he could be wrong. His intelligence is real and total, and it has one blind spot, and the blind spot is himself. He can read every mind in the room except the one doing the reading. And there is a deeper irony buried in Bill, which is that for all his talk of being beyond mortal limits, he is at his most fragile in the mindscape, the dream world he considers his home turf. This is a point worth being precise about because it is easy to get backwards. You would assume a dream demon is strongest inside a mind, that the dream world is where he is a god, and the waking world is where he is weak. The truth, the thing that eventually kills him, is closer to the reverse. Inside a mind, certain rules apply that can be turned against him, and the Pines do not defeat him by outmuscling him in the real world. They defeat him by luring him back into a mind where for all his power he can be trapped and broken. So even Bill's home ground is a kind of illusion, a confidence that turns out to be misplaced. The smartest thing in Gravity Falls believes his own legend, and believing your own legend, the story keeps telling us, is the one mistake intelligence cannot save you from. Here is the part that honestly gets under my skin about Bill, though, and it is a small thing. For all his menace, he is fun. He is funny, he is charming, he is the most entertaining presence in every scene he enters, and that is not a flaw in the writing, it is the whole point of him. Because that is how manipulation actually works. The dangerous ones are never the obvious monsters. They are the ones you are enjoying yourself with right up until the moment the flames turn blue and you realize you have already shaken his hand. Hirsch made his devil delightful on purpose, and it is one of the most honest things the series ever does about how a clever, dangerous mind gets what it wants out of the rest of us. There is another genius in this story, and his is the saddest intelligence of all, because you meet the ruin of him first and the brilliance of him second, so that when you finally understand who he used to be, it lands like a punch. When Dipper and Mabel first encounter Fiddleford McGucket, he is a wild, filthy, gibbering old man out in the town, a figure of pure comedy. The local lunatic who howls nonsense and rummages through the trash. For a long stretch, he is just Old Man McGucket, the crazy hillbilly, a running joke. And then slowly, the joke is peeled back, and what you find underneath is among the most tragic and clever people in the whole thing. Because McGucket was, in his day, a genuine engineering genius. He was Ford's partner, the man Ford met at Backups-More, and he was the one who could take Ford's impossible ideas and actually build them. Where Ford was the theorist, the one who understood what the anomalies of Gravity Falls were and dreamed up what might be done with them, McGucket was the hands, the roboticist and inventor who could turn a mad diagram into a working machine. Much of the technology at the center of the town's biggest catastrophe exists because McGucket built it. He was not a sidekick or a helper, he was half of the mind that made the great work possible, and he is given that dignity even when he is being used for laughs if you are paying attention. And here is the tragedy, made entirely out of intelligence turned against itself. McGucket invented a device, a gun that could erase memories. He built it for a mixture of reasons, but the deepest one is the most human and the most terrible, which is that he had seen something during their work together, something involving the machine and the danger it represented, that he desperately wanted to forget. He had glimpsed the catastrophe coming and could not bear to carry the knowledge, so he built himself a way to put it down. He invented the perfect tool for not knowing. And then he used it, and used it again, and used it again, and every use did real, cumulative damage to his mind. A little at first, then memory loss, then, with enough overuse, a slide into the raving madness the twins meet him in. The genius who could build anything built the one machine that would unmake him, and he pulled the trigger on himself over and over to escape a truth he found unbearable. There is no crueler shape a story about intelligence could take, and it is told without flinching. The memory gun then grows into one of the richest ideas in the series because McGucket was not the only one using it. There is a group in the town, a secret society, that got hold of his invention and turned it into a mission. The Society of the Blind Eye is exactly what its name suggests, a cabal devoted to keeping the town ordinary by erasing, from anyone who sees too much, the memory of the supernatural. They walk around Gravity Falls, softly wiping the strangeness out of people's heads, one witness at a time, so that the town can go on believing it is normal. And there is something profound and a little chilling in that, because it is a portrait of willful ignorance built as an institution, a whole organization dedicated to the proposition that some things are better forgotten. A story that spends its entire length arguing that you should look harder, that the surface is always a lie, that the empty page is only hiding its ink, gives you a villain group whose entire philosophy is the opposite, that you should look away, that the writing should be erased. It is the anti-dibber. It is the intelligence of forgetting, set against the intelligence of finding out. And the reason the memory gun matters so much, the reason it is not just a neat gadget, is that it lets the story quietly ask a truly hard question about knowledge, which is whether some knowledge is worth the cost of carrying it. Dipper's whole personality says no, that you should always want to know, that the answer is always worth having. McGucket's whole ruined life says otherwise, says that there are things a mind is not built to hold, and that a person might reasonably choose to put them down even at the cost of himself. That argument is never resolved cleanly, and I respect the writing enormously for that. It lets both truths stand. The boy who cannot stop investigating and the old man who investigated one thing too many and had to burn it out of his own head are two ends of the same question. And Gravity Falls is honest enough to admit it does not know which of them is right. But I promised earlier not to leave McGucket as only the crazy old man, and neither does the story, in one of its most discreetly hopeful moves. He does not stay broken. Over the course of the run, and especially as it barrels toward its ending, McGucket recovers. Confronted with his lost memories, presented with the truth he had erased, his mind begins to knit itself back together, and the genius that was buried under all that madness comes back online. By the finale, he is not the town joke anymore. He is an inventor and an ally the heroes cannot do without. The man who builds a machine that helps turn the tide when the world is ending. That recovery matters because it is the closest thing to an answer, or at least a hope, to the terrible question the memory gun poses. It suggests that the knowledge you tried to bury is still yours, that a mind can be put back together, that the things we run from can be faced and survived rather than only escaped. The man who invented forgetting is redeemed by remembering, and that, in a story this obsessed with hidden things and buried truths, is about as close to a thesis as it ever lets itself get. I find McGucket the most moving of all these clever minds, more than Ford, more than Dipper, because his story is the one that admits intelligence can be a burden as easily as a gift. Ford's genius isolates him. Dipper's genius endangers him. But McGucket's genius nearly destroys him outright, and then, at the very end, becomes the thing that saves everyone. And the distance between those two poles is the distance the whole night is trying to teach you to travel. Do not look away, it says, even from the thing that broke you. Especially from the thing that broke you. There is a machine to build on the other side of it. Before the dream demon ever comes out, you are given a smaller villain to practice on, and he is one of the cleverest and most gently disturbing characters in the whole first season, precisely because he is a child. Gideon Gleeful is a little boy with an enormous puff of white hair, a sparkling powder blue suit, and the manner of a television preacher. And he runs a wildly successful act in Gravity Falls as a psychic, the tent of telepathy, where crowds come to watch him read minds and reveal secrets and seem to know the unknowable. He is Stan's business rival, and for most of the first season, he is the twins' most persistent human enemy. And what makes him work as a villain is that his powers look supernatural and are, at their root, entirely a con. Because Gideon is not really psychic, his act, the mind reading and the uncanny knowledge of strangers' private lives, is built on hidden technology, on concealed cameras and microphones planted around the town, little pin-sized devices that feed him information he then performs as clairvoyance. He knows the tourists' secret because he watched them, not because he read their soul. And this is a sincerely sharp piece of writing because it makes Gideon a perfect miniature of the whole argument about intelligence and deception. His power is surveillance dressed up as magic. He has understood, young as he is, that if you simply know more than the people around you and you hide how you came to know it, you can appear to have supernatural gifts, and people will hand you their trust and their money and their fear. That is a con man's insight, the same family of intelligence as Stan's, but pointed in a much colder direction, and it is chilling to see it worked out so completely by someone so small. His schemes across the first season are ambitious out of all proportion to his size. He wants the mystery shack, he wants the journals and the power they promise, and he pursues both with a manipulator's patience and a manipulator's total willingness to use anyone. He works his way into Mabel's good graces, tries to charm her, and when charm fails, he turns to coercion, using what he has and what he knows as leverage. He plays his adoring parents, his adoring town, and his rivals against each other. For a child, he has an almost frightening grasp of how to make people do what he wants, and he is never softened into a mere brat. He is a real threat, and the reason he is a real threat is that he is smart in the specific way that hurts people, the way that treats affection as a tool and trust as a weakness to be exploited. But there is a crucial distinction drawn with Gideon that I want to get right because it blurs easily and it matters. Not all of his power is fake. Alongside the hidden cameras and the surveillance con, Gideon possesses a genuine magical object, an amulet that grants real telekinesis, the ability to move objects and people with his mind. That amulet is drawn from the same well of real magic the journals catalog, and it is the thing that makes him physically dangerous rather than just socially dangerous. So Gideon is a fascinating hybrid. Half of his threat is pure fraud, technology, and manipulation masquerading as the supernatural, and half of it is an actual supernatural artifact. And the moment that ends his reign of terror, at least for a while, is when Mabel gets hold of that amulet and destroys it, stripping away his real power and leaving him with only the con, which is a lovely piece of storytelling because it is the emotionally intelligent twin, not the deductive one, who figures out how to disarm him. I keep turning over the fact that this manipulator was made a child, and I do not think that is a throwaway choice. There is something genuinely unsettling about a kind of intelligence that arrives too early, a mind that has learned to manipulate before it has learned to love. And Gideon is exactly that. He is what happens when cleverness grows faster than character, when a child figures out how to control people before anyone teaches him why he should not. And, to the writer's credit, you are allowed to feel a little sorry for him even as you fear him, because you can see the shape of the lonely, spoiled, desperately insecure kid underneath the powder blue suit, a boy who learned that the only way to be loved was to make people obey. His intelligence is real, and it is bent, and the bend is not entirely his fault, and holding all three of those things at once is the sort of balancing act this story pulls off better than almost anything else made for children. There is a small, mean irony I enjoy about Gideon, the thing that connects him back to the larger design. He spends the whole first season chasing the journals, convinced that if he can just assemble them, he will gain some ultimate power. He treats the books the way Dipper treats them, as the key to everything. But Gideon wants the knowledge for control, and Dipper wants it for understanding, and one of them is rewarded, and one is punished. The same object, the same hunger for hidden knowledge, leads a boy detective toward the truth about his family and leads a boy con man toward ruin. And the difference is not intelligence, because they are both clever. The difference is what they intend to do with what they learn. That is the story telling you as plainly as it ever does, that being smart is not the same as being good, and that the journals, like every powerful thing in Gravity Falls, are only ever as trustworthy as the hands that hold them. And now we come to the biggest and cleverest single thing in the entire series, the secret the whole first season and half the second are built around. And I want to take my time with it because it is the smartest plan any character executes anywhere in Gravity Falls, and it belongs fittingly to the con man. I told you earlier that the Mystery Shack was a front, that Stan was running a 30-year operation underneath it, and that the greed you watched in the early episodes was a mask over something much larger. Here is what was under the mask. Go back to Ford, alone in Gravity Falls with his genius and his grant and his journals. Manipulated by Bill, who had appeared to him as the muse, Ford built a machine. He built an interdimensional portal, a doorway meant to bridge our world and others. And he built it under his house, the house that would one day become the Mystery Shack. He did not build it alone. The blueprints, disastrously, came from Bill, and much of the physical labor came from McGucket, and the raw materials came, in one of the strangest and best details in the whole run, from a genuine crashed spacecraft, a UFO buried beneath the town, a wreck old enough that its presence had shaped the weirdness of the whole place. So the portal is this uneasy collaboration of a manipulated genius, a doomed inventor, and salvaged alien technology, all of it driven by a plan that Ford believed was his own, and that was really Bill's from the start. There was a first trial of the machine, and it went wrong. During that early test, McGucket was briefly pulled into the portal, and he came back changed, terrified, having seen something on the other side that convinced him the whole project was a catastrophe waiting to happen. That is the trauma he would later try to erase from his own mind. Ford, shaken, began to grasp what he had really built and who had really designed it. That Bill's benevolent Muse Act concealed a plan to use the portal to tear down the wall between dimensions and let his nightmare world flood into ours. Ford shut the machine down. But the danger did not end there, because in the struggle over the portal, Ford himself was pulled through it, and he vanished, stranded on the far side, lost across the dimensions for 30 years. And this is where Stan enters the real story, the story under the story. Stan, the estranged twin, the brother whose careless hands had broken a science project decades earlier and shattered the family, arrived at the house to find his brother gone, and a shut-down portal in the basement, and journals that hinted at how it worked. And he made a decision that is, when you really look at it, staggering. He decided to bring his brother back, not in a week, not in a year, however long it took. He took over his brother's identity, told the world he was Stanford, opened the Mystery Shack as a cover and a source of income, and then spent 30 years, 3 full decades, secretly working in that basement to understand and rebuild and restart the portal that had swallowed his twin. Sit with the scale of that. 30 years. A man with no scientific training, a con artist, a high school educated grifter, teaching himself enough to slowly reassemble the most dangerous machine ever built in that town, working from journals written in a genius's private shorthand, hiding the whole thing from the entire world, keeping the lie so watertight that even the family who came to live with him never suspected a thing. The reason he needed the journals so badly, the reason so much of the tension is about who has which book, is that he needed them to finish the work. The greed, the penny pinching, the tourist trap, all of it was fuel and cover for a rescue mission that lasted longer than most marriages. Stan's con was not aimed at money, it was aimed at time. He was buying himself the years and the secrecy he needed to undo the worst thing that had ever happened to his family. The reveal comes in stages, and the staging is a masterclass. First comes the moment where the machine in the basement roars to life and the twins and the audience realize that the grumpy old man has been hiding something enormous, that he is, as the credits told you in Code seasons earlier, not what he seems. And then, once you have absorbed the shock of the machine, you are sat down and told the whole history, the 2 brothers, the broken science project, the Muse, the portal, the 30 years, and every petty thing you laughed at Stan for gets recolored into something close to heroic. The con man you underestimated was running the longest and most selfless operation in the series the entire time, and he was doing it out of love and guilt for the brother he had lost, first as a boy with clumsy hands and then to a doorway between worlds. What makes this the smartest thing in Gravity Falls is not that it is complicated, though it is. It is that it recruits your own assumptions and then detonates them. You spent the better part of 2 seasons certain you had Stan figured out. You had ranked him below the geniuses, below even the manipulative child, filed him as the comic relief with a cash register, and the reveal does not just add information, it retroactively rewrites everything you have already seen, so that on a second watch, the early episodes are a completely different story, full of a man carrying an impossible secret and an impossible grief behind a bad toupee and a worse attitude. That is the highest form of the mystery box trick, a secret that reaches backward through the entire narrative and changes the meaning of scenes you thought you understood, and it is earned, because the clues were all there, in the journals, in the credits, in 100 small moments, waiting for you to be smart enough, or to watch a second time and see them. Let us step back from the grand machinery for a while and look at a single episode, the one that first brings Bill Cipher fully into the story, because it is essentially a heist film about a robbery that takes place inside a man's head, and it is one of the smartest single episodes ever built here. It closes out the first season, and its premise is a beautiful piece of escalation. Gideon, still scheming for the combination to Stan's safe, still hungry for the journals and the power he believes they hold, does something a con man alone could never do. He reaches out to a demon, he summons Bill Cipher and makes a deal, and the job he hires the demon for is not a physical break-in. It is a break-in of the mind. He sends Bill into Stan's dreams to steal the safe combination straight out of the old man's memories. I love the mechanics of this because it takes the language of a caper, the plan, the infiltration, the vault, and relocates all of it into the landscape of a person's thoughts. Bill enters Stan's mindscape, the dreaming interior of his head, and it is rendered as a place you can move through, a world built out of memory and association where the rules bend and reality is soft. And the safe combination is not sitting in a box. It is buried in Stan's memories, hidden somewhere in the accumulated wreckage of a long and secretive life, and Bill has to hunt through the man's past to find it. Dipper and Mabel and Seuss realize what is happening and follow Bill in, chasing him through Stan's own head to stop the robbery, which means the climax of the first season is a chase scene through the memories of the character you understand least, and it becomes an excuse to show you fragments of who Stan really is, little glimpses of a past that will not fully make sense until the great reveal much later. What makes it a smart episode rather than just a visually inventive one is that it understands the mind as a space with its own logic, a place where the way to win is not force but cleverness. You cannot punch your way through a dream. You have to understand how the dream works, what its rules are, how thought and memory and emotion shape the terrain, and the kid's victory, such as it is, comes from grasping those rules faster than a demon expects a pack of children to. It is teaching you, early, the lesson that will eventually decide the entire war against Bill, which is that the battlefield of the mind rewards understanding over strength. The being who treats every mind as a lock is, in his first real appearance, nearly foiled by children who figure out how the lock works from the inside. And this episode does something else that turns out to matter for everything after. It establishes Bill's method in miniature before you understand the full scope of him. You see him deal, you see him trade knowledge and power for access, you see him treat a human mind as a place to be entered, searched, and looted. And you see, crucially, that he can be resisted, that he is not omnipotent, that a mind is not simply his to take if the people in it fight for it. All of that is set up, planted at the end of the first season, for the enormous confrontation that will end the whole story. And it is planted so casually, wrapped in comedy and a monster of the weak structure, that you do not realize you are being handed the rules of the final battle a season and a half early. That is the mystery box discipline again. No lesson is wasted here. Everything it teaches you, it plans to make you use. There is a smaller thing in this episode that I find deeply touching, and it connects to Stan's whole hidden intelligence. The reason his mind is such a difficult, defended, cluttered place to rob is that he is a man with a great deal to hide, and the episode lets you feel that without explaining it. You do not yet know about the portal, or the 30 years, or the brother lost across dimensions, but you can sense, wandering through the strange architecture of Stan's head, that this is not a simple man, that there are locked doors and buried rooms in there, that the grumpy huckster has an interior far larger and sadder than his surface suggests. On a first watch, it just reads as atmosphere. On a second watch, knowing everything, it is almost unbearable because you understand exactly what all those locked doors were hiding, and you realize the shape of Stan's secret was shown to you, literally as the architecture of his own mind, long before you were ever told what the secret was. So the Mind Heist is not just a fun episode, it is the story laying its final board on the table while pretending to play a smaller game. And that is the thing I most admire about how Gravity Falls handles its own intelligence. It does not save its cleverness for the finale. It spends it constantly in throwaway episodes, in background jokes, in the architecture of a dream, trusting that you will not notice how much of the ending it has already faintly handed you. The second season gives Bill a proper duel with Dipper, and it is one of the more interesting things done with the whole idea of intelligence, because it is an episode about a smart boy getting outsmarted and about how he claws his way back. Dipper has spent the season obsessed as ever with a mystery, in this case a laptop he has recovered, that might hold answers about the author, a machine locked behind a password he cannot crack. And into that obsession, exactly as he did with Ford, walks Bill Cipher with an offer. Bill will give Dipper the password. All Dipper has to do is agree to a deal and let Bill borrow something small, or so it seems. What Bill actually wants is Dipper's body, a physical foothold in the waking world, and the deal, once struck, lets the demon take possession of the boy. What follows is plainly disturbing for a kid's show, and it is smart about why it is disturbing. Bill, wearing Dipper's body, moving his limbs, speaking with his mouth, sets about trying to destroy the journal, the one thing that most threatens him, and he does it while Dipper is locked out of his own flesh, a helpless spirit watching a demon pilot his body toward the destruction of everything he cares about. It is a nightmare about being outmaneuvered on the most intimate level possible, having your own hunger for knowledge, your own obsessive curiosity, used as the exact bait that costs you control of yourself. Bill did not overpower Dipper any more than he overpowered Ford. He read him, found the obsession, offered the answer, and let the boy's own cleverness and impatience do the rest. The sharpest kid in the cast gets beaten by his own best quality turned against him. And that is a far more sophisticated idea than simply having a villain be stronger. But the way Dipper wins it back is where the episode becomes something special, and it depends on the two things Gravity Falls most wants you to understand about intelligence. The first is that Dipper, even locked out of his body, does not stop thinking. He works out that a possessed body suffers, that Bill, wearing his flesh, is straining and damaging it, and he understands the rules of his own dispossession well enough to find the seam in them. He gets back into a body, not his own at first, but a puppet, a sock, and there is something perfect and a little absurd about the boy genius being reduced to animating a sock in order to fight a demon. It is a reminder that cleverness is not dignity, that a real mind uses whatever it can reach, even a sock, especially a sock. And the second thing, the thing that actually saves him, is not his intelligence at all. It is his sister. Because this is also Mabel's episode, and the emotional engine of it is that Dipper's crisis collides with something Mabel has poured her whole heart into, a puppet show she has been building toward for the entire episode, a dream of hers. And at the climax, Bill offers Mabel a devil's bargain of her own, essentially threatening the thing she loves against her brother's safety. And Mabel, the twin you are forever tempted to dismiss as the silly, bubbly, non-intellectual one, makes the choice that Dipper's pure logic could not force, and that Bill, for all his genius, did not see coming. She chooses her brother over her dream, sacrifices the things she has worked for to save him, and that choice is what breaks Bill's hold. The demon who can read any mind as a lock does not understand a love that would give up its own dearest thing without hesitation, because that kind of love is not a lock at all. It is not a transaction, and Bill only understands transactions. That is one of the single smartest moments in the whole series, and it is smart precisely because it is not an intellectual victory. The entire episode dramatizes Dipper's kind of intelligence being outfought, and then the day is won with Mabel's kind, the emotional intelligence, the capacity for sacrifice, the reading of a person's heart rather than the picking of their mind's lock. It is the case, made in miniature, that the deductive, analytical brilliance we are trained to call smart is not actually the highest form of intelligence in this universe, and that the thing that beats a genius manipulator is not a bigger genius. It is a sister who will burn down her own dream for you without stopping to calculate. Bill can outthink Dipper. He cannot outthink Mabel because she is not playing the game he understands. And there is a final grace note in the episode that I love, the thing that gets me every time. When it is over, Dipper, who spent the whole season treating his own quest as the most important thing in the world, understands what his sister gave up for him, and it lands without a speech. A boy simply realizes that his cleverness would have destroyed him if not for a love he had been taking for granted, and he carries that forward in silence. In the middle of a duel with a demon, the smartest kid in Gravity Falls learns that being the cleverest one in the room is not the thing that will save his life. The person who loves him is. He will need to remember that, and so will everyone else, before the end. Let me spend a little while on time travel because Gravity Falls plays with it more than once, and because it is important, on a night about the smartest moments in a show, to be honest about which moments are clever and which are just chaotic fun dressed up as cleverness. The story introduces a time traveler, a bumbling agent from the future named Blendin Blandin, whose time machine is disguised as an ordinary tape measure, a lovely little detail. The vastness of time travel folded into a household object. And when the twins get their hands on that device, something happens that I appreciate, which is that they are not allowed to use it wisely, because they do not. When Dipper and Mabel get a time machine, they use it the way any 12-year-old would, impulsively, selfishly, for small things, to win a stuffed pig at a carnival, to fix a bad day, to chase some minor want. And that impulsiveness is given real consequences. Time travel in Gravity Falls is not a tool of brilliant planning. It is a comedy of paradox and unintended damage, a way of dramatizing that even a nearly infinite power in the hands of a child becomes a mess of do-overs and small regrets. There is a truly bittersweet edge to the way the twins learn that fixing one thing breaks another, that you cannot rewind your way to a perfect day, that some choices have to be lived with rather than undone. It is not a smart plan. It is the opposite of a smart plan, and it would be a mistake to list it among the great feats of intelligence just because time travel sounds cerebral. But there is a kind of intelligence in how the whole thing is framed, even if the characters inside it are being foolish, and that is the writer's intelligence about consequence. A lazier show would use time travel as a magic reset button, a way to escape the weight of decisions. Gravity Falls uses it to teach the exact opposite lesson, that the weight of decisions is the point, that a life is made of choices you cannot take back, and that the fantasy of undoing them is a childish one you have to grow out of. When the twins finally learn to stop reaching for the rewind, to accept an imperfect day rather than chase a perfect one through 100 exhausting loops, that is the writing being smart about a subject the characters are being dumb about. The cleverness is in the frame, not in the deed. And the time traveler himself pays off in a way that rewards the story's long memory. Blendin returns later, and the grudge he holds against the twins for the trouble they caused him becomes the engine of another episode built around a competition, a game with real stakes in which the impulsive misuse of time travel from earlier comes back to bite them. I will not overstate the specifics, but the pattern is a thing I keep admiring, which is that nothing is disposable. A silly time travel romp in the first season is not just a silly romp. It plants a character and a grievance that will be collected on later, because Gravity Falls treats its own past the way Dipper treats the journals, as a record where everything might turn out to matter. The writers, in other words, are smarter than their characters, and the gap between the two is often where the best comedy and the best feeling live. There is a genuine philosophical point buried in all of this, and it connects back to everything we have talked about tonight, so let me draw it out. The story keeps testing different kinds of power against different kinds of wisdom. It gives a genius a portal, and the genius nearly ends the world. It gives a con man 30 years, and the con man saves his brother. It gives 2 children a time machine, and the children learn that some things should not be undone. In every case, the lesson is the same, that raw capability, whether it is intellect or magic or the ability to rewrite time, is worth nothing without the judgment to use it well. And that judgment almost never comes from being clever. It comes from being humbled. Ford is humbled by Bill. Stan is humbled by 30 years of loneliness. The twins are humbled by a broken carnival day they cannot fix. Intelligence sets the stage in Gravity Falls over and over, but it is humility that ever actually solves anything, and that is a really wise thing for a cartoon to keep insisting on. So when people make lists of the smartest moments in the show and they reach for the time travel episodes because time travel feels like a big, brainy science fiction idea, I gently disagree. The time travel is where the story is at its most honest about the limits of cleverness. The smart thing is not the machine. The smart thing is the story knowing that a machine like that in the hands of anyone who has not yet learned to live with their own choices is not a gift at all. It is just a faster way to make the same mistakes. I have been circling Mabel all night, and it is time to land on her properly, because if this show has a secret argument about intelligence, and I believe it does, then Mabel is the character who carries it, and she is the one the whole thing dares you to underestimate. On the surface, she is everything the culture trains us to read as the opposite of smart. She is loud, bubbly, boy-crazy, obsessed with glitter and stickers and cheerful chaos, given to grand romantic schemes and terrible puns, and she wears sweaters covered in shooting stars. Next to her brother, the anxious little detective with his journal and his deductions, she looks like the comic relief, the emotional one, the twin who feels while Dipper thinks. And the writing knows exactly how you are reading her, and it spends 2 seasons softly proving you wrong. Because Mabel is not unintelligent, she is intelligent in a completely different register, and it is a register the world is very bad at recognizing. Mabel reads people. She understands what a person actually needs, often before they understand it themselves, and she moves through the social and emotional world with an instinct that Dipper, for all his brilliance, simply does not have. Where he sees a puzzle, she sees a person. Where he wants to solve, she wants to connect. And again, the problems his kind of intelligence cannot touch are exactly the ones her kind solves without breaking a sweat. She is the one who disarms the villainous child by understanding him well enough to strip away his power. She is the one who beats the demon in the duel we talked about. Not by outthinking him, but by outloving him, by making a sacrifice his transactional mind cannot process. Her intelligence keeps winning the fights that logic cannot win. And there is a sharply pointed argument here, one that matters beyond a cartoon. We have a bad habit as a culture of ranking the analytical mind above the emotional one, of calling the boy with the journal smart and the girl with the sweater sweet, and Gravity Falls sets out to complicate that hierarchy on purpose. It gives you the full spread of intelligences we named at the start of the night, the academic genius, the deductive detective, the street smart con man, the manipulative demon. And then, subtly, it lets the emotional intelligence be the one that repeatedly saves everyone. Not because feeling is better than thinking, the story is too honest for anything that simple, but because the two are supposed to work together, and the great failures here almost all come from thinking that has cut itself off from feeling. Ford's genius fails when it is lonely. Bill's genius fails because it cannot feel. And the twins succeed over and over, precisely because Dipper's mind and Mabel's heart are 2 halves of a single functioning intelligence, and neither one is complete without the other. There is a deeper current under Mabel too, and it is not all sunshine, which is part of why she works. Her fierce attachment to joy, to summer, to keeping things the way they are comes from a real fear, a fear of change, of growing up, of the childhood she shares with her brother running out. And late in the story, that fear becomes a genuine vulnerability, a place where her emotional nature can be turned against her, where her desperate wish to freeze a perfect summer in place makes her, for a terrible moment, exploitable. Her kind of intelligence is not pretended to be invincible any more than Dipper's is. Emotional intelligence has its own blind spots, its own ways of being fooled, and Mabel's is her difficulty facing the fact that things have to end. But even that is treated with respect, as a real feature of a real mind, not as a proof that she was silly all along. Her fear of endings is the exact emotional counterpart to Dipper's inability to leave a mystery alone. They are both children clinging too hard to something, and they are both love for it while being gently shown the cost. Here is the thing about Mabel that almost nobody gives her credit for, and it is the reason I wanted to save her for near the end. She is, in a very real sense, the reason the family survives at all. All the geniuses here, Ford and McGucket and even Bill, are undone by isolation, by minds that turned inward and lost their grip on other people. The thing that holds the Pines family together through everything, through the reveals and the betrayals and the end of the world, is connection, and connection is Mabel's native language. She is the glue. She is the one who keeps insisting that the people matter more than the mysteries, that the summer is about each other and not about the answers. And by the end, when the smartest characters have very nearly destroyed everything with their cleverness, it is that insistence, her insistence, that turns out to have been the wisest position anyone held the entire time. 2 seasons let you think the boy was the smart twin, And then it turns out the sister, the one you underestimated, had understood the most important thing from the very first day. The mysteries were never the point, the people were, and she knew that before anyone. Let us pull back now from the characters inside the story and talk about the intelligence of the thing itself, the way it is built. Because Gravity Falls belongs to a very small group of stories where the phrase everything means something is not marketing, but simply true. We touched on the layered design at the start of the night, the way the surface hides a sadder story that hides a real puzzle. But I want to talk specifically now about foreshadowing, about the way it plants its future in its past, because it is one of the great examples of the form and a large part of why people rewatch it obsessively. Almost nothing in Gravity Falls is only decoration. The backgrounds are full of symbols that will matter later. There is a wheel of images that appears early in the run, a ring of little pictures around a familiar shape, and for most of the series, it just sits there in the background, an odd bit of set dressing you might never think about. And it turns out to be a prophecy. It turns out to encode the exact combination of people who will one day have to stand together to face the ultimate threat. The answer to the finale was drawn on the wall long before, and it was simply left there in plain sight for years, trusting that the people who cared would notice and the people who did not would not miss anything. That is an astonishing amount of confidence in an audience, and it only works if the story authentically knows where it is going from the beginning, which this one did. The famous coded message we talked about earlier, the one that revealed Stan is not what he seems, lands in this same tradition. It is foreshadowing hidden inside cryptography, a clue to the biggest character twist in the series, planted seasons early, encrypted, so that only the most dedicated viewer would find it, and even then it would mean nothing to them until the reveal caught up. This trick gets used constantly, seeding the future in symbols and codes and background details and offhand lines, and the effect on a rewatch is sincerely uncanny because the second time through you realize you were never being toyed with or stonewalled. It told you everything. It told you from the start. You just did not have the key yet, and it was too polite to force it on you. The reason this matters, the reason it is more than a party trick for obsessive fans, is that it changes the relationship between the story and the person watching it. Most television treats you as a passenger. It shows you what you need when you need it, and it does not expect you to do any work. Gravity Falls treats you as a collaborator, or maybe as a detective, the same way it treats Dipper. It scatters clues and trusts you to assemble them. It hides messages and trusts you to want to read them. And it rewards attention the way a good mystery novel does, so that the sharpest viewers get a second secret story layered over the first one. And crucially, it never punishes the viewer who does not do the work. The surface story is complete and satisfying on its own. The hidden layer is a gift for the people who want it, not a tax on the people who do not. That balance, generosity without condescension, is very hard to pull off. And this does it about as well as anything ever made for a young audience. The part I find most remarkable, the thing that separates real foreshadowing from cheap mystery, is this. For a story to plan its ending in its beginning, the ending has to exist before the beginning airs. The creator has to know, on some level, where the whole thing lands before he shows you the first frame. Alex Hirsch has spoken about how much of the show was mapped out early, how the big beats were known long before they arrived, and you can feel that certainty in the texture of the thing. There is no flailing, no obvious retconning, no sense of a story being made up to fill time. Every season feels like it is walking toward a destination it can already see, and that is why the clues line up so perfectly, because they were planted by someone who knew exactly what they would eventually mean. A story that is making it up as it goes cannot foreshadow, it can only pretend to. This is the real thing, and you can tell because the promises made in the first episode are all kept, precisely in the last. There is a specific kind of pleasure in this that I do not think has a good name. The pleasure of a story that respected you enough to hide things from you. It sounds paradoxical. You would think being kept in the dark is the opposite of respect. But there is a difference between a story that withholds because it has nothing, and a story that withholds because it trusts you to find what it has hidden. And Gravity Falls is entirely the second kind. Every rewatch feels like being let further into a confidence. Every freeze frame turns up something new. And all of this was done while pretending on its surface to be a light summer cartoon about two kids and a talking pig, which is maybe the single most impressive magic trick in the whole thing, that it carried an entire second encrypted, foreshadowed masterpiece on its back the whole time, and never once let the weight show. That is not just clever writing, that is a kind of architectural genius, and it is why the series has outlived the moment it aired in and become something people return to like a puzzle box they can never quite finish opening. I want to stay in the real world for a while longer, because there is a decision behind Gravity Falls that is one of the smartest things anyone involved ever made, and it happens off-screen entirely. In November of 2015, Alex Hirsch confirmed that the second season would be the show's last, that Gravity Falls was going to end on purpose after 2 seasons and 40 episodes, and the finale aired the following February. The show was not canceled. It was not run into the ground until the network pulled the plug. It was concluded deliberately by the person who made it at the point he had always intended to conclude it, and it is hard to overstate how unusual and how intelligent that choice was. Consider the pressures. Gravity Falls was a hit. It was beloved, it was successful, it had a devoted and growing audience, and there is every commercial reason in the world for a network to want more of a thing like that. To push for a 3rd season, a 4th, a spin-off, to keep the machine running as long as the money holds. The easy path, the path most successful shows take, is to keep going until the magic drains out, until the mysteries have all been solved and resolved and the characters have run out of anywhere to grow, until the thing people love becomes a tired imitation of itself. We have all watched shows die that slow death, outstaying their own story, and we have all felt the particular sadness of a thing we loved becoming a thing we merely tolerated. Hirsch chose not to let that happen, and choosing it took a kind of discipline that is deeply rare, because the story was designed with an ending, a single summer with a beginning and a middle and a close, and to honor that design meant walking away from it while people still wanted more. That is the whole thing. The intelligence was in knowing that a mystery box only works if you are willing to close it, that a story built on secrets has to be willing to spend those secrets and then stop, rather than manufacturing new ones forever to keep the audience hooked. All that beautiful foreshadowing we just talked about, all those clues planted in the first episode, only pay off because the writing was willing to reach the episode where they pay off and then end. A version of Gravity Falls that ran for 8 seasons would have had to keep deferring its own answers, keep inventing new mysteries to replace the ones it solved, and the whole delicate architecture would have collapsed under the weight of its own success. By ending on time, Hirsch protected the thing that made it worth loving in the first place. There is a thematic rhyme here that I find almost too perfect because the story is, at its core, about a summer ending, about childhood running out, about the fact that the best things are temporary and that trying to freeze them in place is a kind of doom. We talked about Mabel's fear of endings, her desperate wish to keep the summer from ever finishing. Well, the show itself refused to make that mistake. It practiced what it preached. It let its own summer end rather than clinging to it past the point of meaning. And in doing so, it became a rare example of a story whose form matches its content, a thing about the necessity of endings that had the courage to actually end. That is not a small thing. That is a creator understanding his own work well enough to know that the kindest and smartest thing he could do for it was to let it go. I should be careful and neutral here about the real people involved because I am talking about a working artist and a company, and I only want to state what is documented. Hirsch has spoken publicly about the toll of making the show, about how much of himself went into it, and about wanting to end it on his own terms while it was still good rather than letting it decline. Those are his stated reasons, and I will leave them there without speculating beyond them. But whatever the private mix of exhaustion and artistic conviction that went into the decision, the result is a show with one of the cleanest, most intentional shapes in modern animation, 40 episodes, that begin where they mean to begin and end where they mean to end, with almost nothing wasted in between. And that shape is itself an act of intelligence, a piece of authorship as deliberate as any cipher in the credits. The lesson of it, the thing I take from it, is that knowing when to stop is its own form of genius, and maybe the rarest one. Gravity Falls is full of brilliant minds who did not know when to stop. Ford could not stop building, Dipper could not stop investigating, McGucket could not stop erasing, Bill could not stop grasping for more. The whole tragedy of the series, over and over, is intelligence that does not know its own limits, that keeps pushing past the point where it should have quit. And then the actual object, The thing Hirsch made does the one thing none of its characters can reliably do. It stops at the right moment. It ends while it is still whole. It is the story taking its own hardest lesson and, alone among all its geniuses, actually managing to live by it. There is a story about Gravity Falls that takes place entirely outside the show, and it is one of the purest expressions of the whole thing's intelligence, because it is the moment the puzzle stopped being something you watched and became something you physically chased across the world. In the summer of 2016, after the series had ended, Alex Hirsch launched what became known as the Cipher Hunt, a real-world scavenger hunt, an alternate reality game that sent fans out of their houses and into the actual physical world to solve clues. The prize, the thing at the end of the trail, was a real object, a statue of Bill Cipher hidden somewhere out in the world, and the only way to find it was to work together, decode a chain of clues, and follow them from place to place until the hunt converged on a single location. What I find beautiful about this is that it is the whole philosophy made literal. For 4 years, the audience had been trained to decode ciphers, to distrust the surface, to believe that hidden messages were real and solvable and worth the effort. The Cipher Hunt was the graduation ceremony for that training. It took all the skills that had been gently taught, the Caesar and the Atbash and the pattern recognition, and the willingness to freeze frame and squint at a symbol, and it turned them loose in reality on clues scattered across genuine physical locations. And it asked the fandom to solve the biggest puzzle the show ever posed together as a collective. And they did. The community organized, pooled its knowledge, decoded the trail, and physically found the statue. The mystery box opened one last time, and this time the box was the size of the world. There was something plainly moving in that beyond the cleverness of it. Because what the Cipher Hunt proved is that the intelligence the show cared about was never really solitary. Yes, Dipper is a lone detective, and Ford is an isolated genius, and the story is full of brilliant minds working in secret. But its ultimate argument, the one it kept making in the finale, and in Mabel, and in The Family, is that intelligence is at its best when it is shared, when minds work together, when the puzzle is solved by a community rather than a lone wolf. And the Cipher Hunt is that argument played out in real life. No single person could have solved it. It required hundreds of people, spread across the world, sharing what they found, checking each other's work, moving as a collective intelligence. The show that taught a generation to decode ciphers ended by proving that the best way to solve a hard problem is together. And it proved it not with a speech, but with an actual event that actually happened. This is also the clearest evidence that the cryptography was never a gimmick, never a decoration bolted on to seem clever. Because a decoration cannot sustain a real-world scavenger hunt years after a show ends. A gimmick does not build a community capable of decoding a chain of physical clues to find a hidden statue. The Cipher Hunt could only work because the ciphers had always been real, because the audience had truly learned to solve them over 4 years of practice. Because the trust between the show and its viewers, the promise that the codes meant something and the effort would be rewarded, had been kept faithfully for the entire run. The hunt was the payoff on 4 years of good faith. Hirsch spent the whole series building an audience of cryptographers, and then he handed them a real puzzle worthy of their skills, and they rose to it. And I want to sit for a moment with how rare that relationship is between a piece of media and the people who love it. Most shows end and simply stop. The story concludes, the credits roll one last time, and whatever community formed around it slowly disperses. Gravity Falls ended and then invited its audience out the door and into the world to keep playing, to use everything it had taught them one final time, and in doing so, it turned the passive act of watching into the active, communal, physical act of solving. That is a story refusing to let the intelligence it cultivated go to waste. It took all the sharpness it had built in its viewers, all the habits of decoding and pattern finding and collaborative deduction, and it gave that sharpness one more thing to do, together in the real world before it let anyone go. So when we talk about the smartest moments in Gravity Falls, I do not think we can leave this one out just because it happens off screen. In a way, it is the smartest moment of all, because it is the one where the intelligence stopped being fictional. The clever plans inside the story are things clever characters do. The cipher hunt is a thing the actual audience did, using skills an actual show actually taught them. And it stands as proof that the whole enterprise, the layered design and the real ciphers and the foreshadowing and the trust, added up to something genuine, something that could function in the world and not just on the screen. It made its viewers smarter in a small and specific and real way, and then it sent them out to prove it. I cannot think of a better ending for a story that was always, underneath the summer adventure, about the joy of figuring things out. There is a debate that runs through the corners of the internet where people write about this show, and it is a fun one to sit with on a quiet night, which is the question of who the smartest character in Gravity Falls actually is. And I want to be clear that this is opinion, not canon, the kind of thing you find in ranked lists on entertainment sites, so treat it as a conversation rather than a fact. The obvious answers are the ones we have spent the night on. Ford with his reported dozen doctorates, Bill with his mastery of every mind he meets, Dipper, the boy detective. But the more interesting arguments, the ones I find myself agreeing with, tend to point somewhere less expected, and that is very much in the spirit of a story that is always daring you to underestimate someone. Take Suze, the Mystery Shack's handyman, a gentle, childlike, endlessly loyal man who reads, on the surface, as one of the least intellectual characters in the whole ensemble. Suze is not book smart. He is not a detective or a scientist. But Suze has a kind of intelligence the writing clearly treasures, an emotional steadiness and a practical competence, and above all, a wisdom about what actually matters that puts most of the geniuses to shame. Suze is almost never fooled about the important things. He knows who he loves, he knows what is right, he knows how to fix what is broken with his hands, and he is never once undone by ego or ambition, which is more than can be said for nearly every brilliant mind in the cast. There is an argument, and I find it persuasive, that Suze is one of the wisest characters in Gravity Falls precisely because he never mistakes cleverness for wisdom, and never wants to be the smartest one present, which frees him to simply be a good one. Or take Wendy, the teenage girl who works the Mystery Shack counter and reads at first as merely the cool older kid, the object of Dipper's crush. Wendy turns out to be among the most capable and level-headed people in the entire cast, a survivalist with real practical skills, unflappable in a crisis, quick and grounded when the fantastical types around her are losing their heads. Her intelligence is the intelligence of competence under pressure, the ability to keep functioning when the world stops making sense. And in a story where the world regularly stops making sense, that is worth more than any number of PhDs. The people who survive the craziest moments here are never the geniuses, but the grounded, the ones who keep their feet under them. And I notice that the show never once punishes Wendy for her lack of interest in the mysteries the others are chasing. She is not the character who needs to solve the town. She is the character who could survive it. And the story treats those as two different and equally serious talents, which is a generosity most writing does not extend to the calm, capable person standing at the edge of the frame. And then there is Pacifica, who deserves a special mention because she has the most interesting arc of transformation in the ensemble. She begins as the rich, spoiled, cruel rival, the mean girl, the character you are set up to dislike, and slowly the frightened, controlled, unhappy person underneath the wealth is revealed. What makes her smart in the end is not raw intellect, but the far harder intelligence of self-examination, the capacity to look at the person she was raised to be and decide, against enormous pressure from her own family, to become someone better. That is a kind of intelligence the story values enormously, the intelligence of moral growth, of seeing your own conditioning clearly enough to break it, and it is completely different from anything Ford or Bill can do. Neither of the great geniuses ever manages that particular feat of self-knowledge as cleanly as the spoiled girl does. If you press me for my own answer, and I know it does not settle anything, I would not name any of the obvious ones. I would name Mabel, and I would name her precisely because she is the character the debate keeps trying to leave off the list. The whole point of the argument about who is smartest is that it is conducted in the language of the thing Mabel is worst at. Ranked reasoning, cold comparison, who could out-puzzle whom, and she keeps winning anyway, in a currency the debate does not know how to score. She reads the room the geniuses cannot read. She makes the move the strategists cannot make. And she does it while everyone around her, the fans included, is busy calling her the sweet one, the emotional one, the one who is there to be protected rather than the one doing the protecting. There is something almost funny about it, the way the smartest person in the story is the one nobody thinks to enter into the contest. And I suspect that is exactly how Hirsch wanted it, because it is the same trick played on Stan, the same trick played on the audience, the same trick played on Bill. The one you underestimate is the one who takes you apart. If the whole series has a single repeated joke about intelligence, that is it, and Mabel is its punchline and its point at once. So what keeps happening across the whole ensemble is a complicating of the very idea of what smart means. You get the obvious geniuses, and then the deck is slyly stacked against them, letting the handyman be wiser, the teenager be more capable, the mean girl be more self-aware, and the emotional twin be the one who saves everyone. The debate about who is smartest is, I think, the show's own game played back at it by the fans, and the answer it seems to want you to reach is that the question is wrong. There is no single smartest character because there is no single kind of smart. There is the genius who cannot see people, and the con man who can read them, and the detective who cannot stop, and the sister who understands hearts, and the handyman who knows what matters, and the girl who chooses to change. Each of them is the sharpest person alive for exactly the problem their kind of intelligence is built to solve, and useless or dangerous for the problems it is not. That is the most quietly radical thing about how Gravity Falls handles intelligence, and it is why the ranked lists never really settle anything. It does not believe in a ladder of smartness with one person at the top. It believes in an ecology of different minds, each necessary, each incomplete, each capable of being both the hero and the fool depending on the problem in front of them. That is a really mature idea, and it is delivered not as a lecture but as a cast, a group of people whose different intelligences only add up to something whole when they work together. Which is, when you think about it, exactly what the finale is going to require of them, and exactly where their great cleverness is going to fail them first, because a group of brilliant, incompatible minds is only as strong as its willingness to actually cooperate, and that willingness, it turns out, is the one thing all their intelligence cannot guarantee. So let us walk slowly and carefully into the end of the show, because everything we have talked about tonight, every kind of intelligence, every clever plan, every genius and con man and manipulator, comes to a head in the finale, and it is one of the most satisfying resolutions in modern animation precisely because it pays off ideas that have been building since the first minutes. The end of Gravity Falls is called Weirdmageddon, and it is the moment the thing everyone has been afraid of finally happens. Bill Cipher escapes into the real world. For the entire series, Bill has been a threat contained, a demon who could only reach the waking world through dreams and deals and the minds of others, always working at one remove, always needing someone to open a door for him. And in the second season, through a chain of events and a rift torn between dimensions, that containment finally fails, and Bill breaks through into physical reality, and the sky over Gravity Falls cracks open. What follows is an apocalypse, but a strange, playful, deeply unsettling one, because it is shaped by the mind of a being who treats reality itself as a toy. Bill remakes the town in the image of his own chaos, warps the laws of physics, turns people to stone, and installs himself as a kind of mad god presiding over a landscape where nothing works the way it should. The genius manipulator who spent the whole show whispering through dreams is now standing in the daylight, and the world bends around him. There is one detail that matters most for a night about intelligence, the thing that makes Weirdmageddon more than just a monster winning. Bill, for all his power, is stuck. He has conquered the town, but he cannot spread beyond it, and the reason is one of the cleverest bits of world building in the whole run. There is a barrier around Gravity Falls, a consequence of the specific weirdness of the place, that keeps his chaos contained to the town itself and prevents him from flooding out into the rest of the world. So the most powerful being in the story, at the height of his triumph, is a god of a single small town, raging against an invisible wall he cannot break, and the whole back half of the finale is about him trying to figure out how to get past it. The apocalypse has a bottleneck, and the bottleneck is knowledge Bill does not have. And that turns the entire endgame into a contest of information, which is exactly the terrain these battles have always been fought on. Because Bill's problem is an intelligence problem. He needs to know how to break the barrier, and the knowledge of how the town's protections work lives in the minds of the people he is trying to defeat. So even at the peak of his power, the demon is reduced to doing the thing he has always done, trying to extract information from a human mind, trying to read a lock and pick it. His omnipotence has a hole in it exactly the size of one piece of knowledge, and the entire war comes down to whether the Pines can keep that knowledge out of his hands, or better yet, use his hunger for it against him. The final confrontation has been quietly rebuilt as a heist in reverse, where the treasure is a secret in a person's head, and the master thief is a god, and the only defense is being cleverer about the mind than the mind reader is. That is a beautiful structure, and it is only possible because 2 seasons established that the real battlefield here was never physical. It was always cognitive. It was always about who knew what and who could get inside whose head. There is a bleakness to the middle of Weirdmageddon that matters, and it is not rushed past. For a stretch, Bill simply wins. The heroes are scattered, some are captured, some are turned to stone. The town is a nightmare, and there is a real sense that intelligence and courage might not be enough this time, that the smartest people in the story have finally met a problem their cleverness cannot solve. And I appreciate that the despair is allowed to breathe, because it makes what comes after mean something. The resistance has to rebuild from almost nothing. The survivors have to find each other in the ruins, regroup, and come up with a plan against a foe who has beaten them at nearly every turn. And crucially, the plan they eventually reach for is not an individual act of genius. It is not Ford outthinking Bill alone, or Dipper solving one last puzzle by himself. It is collective. It requires the whole community, everyone we have met, working together, and we have been told since the pilot that this is what it would take, because the answer was drawn on the wall in the very first episode. That is the setup for the 2 things we have to talk about next: the plan that was supposed to work and did not, and the plan that actually did. And the gap between them, the reason the obvious, clever solution fails, and a stranger, sadder one succeeds, is the whole thesis of the show delivered in its final act. Because Weirdmageddon is not, in the end, defeated by the smartest plan. It is defeated by something the smartest plan could not account for, and understanding why is understanding what Gravity Falls actually believes about intelligence, which we are finally close enough to the end to say plainly. The plan that was supposed to work is the one that had been foreshadowed the longest, and it is the wheel we talked about, the ring of symbols that appeared in the pilot and turned out to be a prophecy. That wheel encodes a specific ritual. It shows a set of symbols, each one standing for a particular person, and the prophecy is that if those 10 people join hands in the right configuration, forming a complete circle, they can generate a power capable of destroying Bill Cipher. 10 specific townspeople, each representing one of the symbols, holding hands to close a circuit against the demon. Dipper, Mabel, Stan, Ford, Seuss, Wendy, McGucket, Gideon, Robbie, and Pacifica. An unlikely coalition that includes heroes and former villains and rivals and children, all of them required, none of them optional. It is the ultimate image of collective intelligence, of a group of very different people, each bringing their own kind of strength, forming something greater than any of them could be alone. And when the moment comes, the survivors gather, they take their places around the circle, they join hands, and the wheel begins to glow. And for one bright moment, it looks as though the prophecy is going to be fulfilled exactly as promised, as it was written on the wall 2 seasons ago. The power builds, the circle is nearly closed, and then it breaks. It breaks not because Bill attacks it, not because the plan was wrong, not because anyone lacked courage or intelligence. It breaks because 2 of the people in the circle cannot stop fighting each other. Stan and Ford, the twins whose whole lives have been shaped by a decades-old grievance, by a broken science project and 30 lost years and a mountain of unspoken resentment, get into an argument at the worst possible moment over exactly the kind of petty, wounded, brotherly thing they have always fought about. And in their anger, they let go of each other's hands, and the circle breaks, and the power collapses, and the one plan that could have saved everyone falls apart in an instant. I cannot overstate how much I love this and how brutal it is. The single smartest plan in the show, the one the universe itself seemed to endorse, the one written into prophecy and foreshadowed since the beginning, fails, and it fails for the most human reason imaginable. It fails because 2 brilliant men could not, in the crucial second, set aside their own pride. It is the exact same flaw that has been diagnosed in Bill all along. the ego that will not bend, the self-regard that overrides everything else. And here it turns out the heroes have it too. The smartest villain is undone by ego, and the smartest plan of the heroes is undone by ego. And that parallel is drawn deliberately because it is telling you something the story believes very deeply. Intelligence does not protect you from your own smallness. The most brilliant minds in the whole thing, on both sides, are brought low by the same petty pride, and the prophecy, the perfect plan, the collective genius of 10 people is worth nothing the moment 2 of them would rather be right than be together. That is an honestly profound thing to do to your own most cherished setup. 2 seasons of pointing at that wheel, promising you that it mattered, letting the most attentive fans decode it and anticipate it, building it up as the answer. And then, at the moment of truth, the answer is allowed to fail, not because the answer was wrong, but because the people holding it were human. The plan was smart, the people were flawed, and in Gravity Falls, over and over, the flaw beats the plan, because the story simply does not believe that being clever is enough. It never has. From the Broken Science Project onward, it has been telling you that intelligence is fragile, that it can be derailed by an accident or a grudge or a moment of pride, and the failure of the wheel is the largest and most heartbreaking proof of that thesis in the entire series. So the wheel does not save the day. I want to be very clear about that, because it is easy to misremember, easy to assume the prophecy paid off the way prophecies usually do. It did not. The circle broke, the power died, and Bill, watching, delighted, seized the moment. The hero's best and most foreshadowed plan collapsed in front of them, and they were left with nothing, cornered, out of options, facing a god who had just watched their salvation crumble because 2 old men could not stop bickering. That is where the finale leaves them at the bottom with the smart plan in ruins, and it is precisely because the smart plan failed that what comes next has to be something else entirely, not a cleverer plan, not a better prophecy, something that has been argued all along to be stronger than intelligence, and it belongs fittingly to the con man, the least book smart of them all, the one who was never going to solve this with genius because genius was never his weapon. What beats Bill is not the smartest move in the show, it is the most human one, and it costs the man who makes it almost everything he has. Here is how the demon actually dies, and I want to lay it out slowly and precisely, because it is the culmination of every idea we have followed tonight, and because it is exactly the kind of plot mechanics this channel gets fact-checked on, so I'm going to be careful to get it right. After the wheel fails, Bill holds all the cards, he has the pines cornered, and he still needs the one thing he has always needed, the knowledge of how to break the barrier around the town so he can spread his apocalypse out into the wider world. And so, in a final bargain, Bill offers a deal. He will spare the family, he says, in exchange for that knowledge, and he intends to get it the way he always gets things, by entering a mind and taking it. Specifically, he wants into Ford's mind, because Ford is the one who understands the town's deepest secrets, the scientist, the author, the man who knows how everything works. But there is a problem for Bill, and it is a beautiful piece of setup, load-bearing, and easy to get wrong. Ford's mind cannot be taken the way Bill needs because of a specific defense. Ford has in his head a metal plate, and that plate blocks the memory gun, the very device that will turn out to be the key to the whole trap. The plan the family improvises depends on getting Bill to enter a mind they can then wipe with McGucket's memory gun, erasing the demon along with everything else in that mind. But if Bill enters Ford's head, the plate makes the memory gun useless and the trap fails. Ford cannot be the bait. His own defenses, ironically, disqualify him from the one role that matters. And so the plan requires the other twin. It requires Stan. And this is where the con man, the least academically clever person in the whole story, executes the single most important deception in the series. And it is pure con man craft, nothing else. Stan and Ford switch. They trade clothes, and they imitate each other's voices, and they present themselves to Bill so that the demon believes the man in front of him, the man offering to let him in, is Ford the genius, when it is actually Stan the fraud. It is the oldest trick Stan knows, the impersonation, the confidence game, pretending to be someone he is not, the exact skill he used to steal his brother's whole identity for 30 years. And here at the end of the world, he uses it one last time to fool a god. Bill, arrogant, certain, hungry for the knowledge he thinks lives in that head, does not check carefully enough. He is too eager. He takes the bait and he enters Stan's mind believing it is Ford's, and the moment he is inside, the trap closes. Because inside a mind, Bill is not the invincible god he appears to be in the ruined daylight of the town. This is the point that has been set up since the very first mind heist at the end of the first season. The mindscape, the interior of a mind, is where Bill is most fragile, not most powerful, and the family knows it, and they have lured him precisely there. Once Bill is inside Stan's head, believing he has won, Ford fires the memory gun. And here I want to be very clear, because this is the exact detail viewers catch. It is Ford who pulls the trigger, Ford who fires the memory gun into his brother's mind, and Stan who volunteered for it, knowing what it would cost him. Stan gave up his own mind on purpose. He offered his own memories as the trap. Understanding that erasing Bill meant erasing himself, every year of his life, every memory of his brother and his family and the children he had come to love, all of it, gone, to take the demon down with it. And inside that dissolving mind, as the memory gun does its work and the whole interior world of Stan's life begins to come apart, Bill finally realizes he has been fooled, that he is not in Ford's head at all, that he has walked into the mind of the con man and the con man has him. He panics, he tries to escape. And Stan, standing inside his own collapsing memories, watching everything he has ever been dissolve around him, does the most Stan thing possible. He does not outthink Bill. He does not solve a final puzzle. He punches him. He beats the demon to pieces with his fists inside his own disintegrating mind, while everything he is fades to white around them both. And Bill Cipher, the smartest and most powerful being in the entire show, is destroyed, erased, unmade, taken apart by an ordinary old man's fists in the ruins of an ordinary old man's memory, because that old man was willing to give up literally everything and the demon was too proud to imagine he would. Sit with the shape of that, because it is the whole show in a single act. The genius could not do it, disqualified by the very defenses that made his mind so valuable. The prophecy could not do it, broken by pride. The Wheel of 10 could not do it. In the end, the thing that kills the smartest villain in the story is a con man's oldest trick, an impersonation, married to a sacrifice no calculation could ever have produced, because you cannot reason your way to giving up your entire self for the people you love. That is not an intellectual act, it is a moral one, an act of love so total it looks like self-destruction. And it is completely beyond the reach of every genius in the cast and every genius the villain ever met. Bill spent his whole existence certain that mortals were locks to be picked and minds were vaults to be robbed. And he died inside the one mind that was willing to burn itself to the ground rather than be robbed, held by a man who beat him with his hands because his hands were the only weapon he had ever really needed. I do not want to move past what that cost, because the story does not. And it is here that all the cleverness we have spent the night admiring finally reveals what it was always in service of. When the memory gun did its work and Bill was gone and the sky over Gravity Falls healed and the portal that had haunted the whole story exploded and closed for good, and the town began to return to normal, Stan was still standing, but he was empty. He did not know his brother. He did not know Suze or Wendy or the children he had spent the summer with. He did not know himself, the man who had run the longest con in the show, who had rebuilt an interdimensional machine with no training, who had held an impossible secret for 30 years, was reduced to a blank, a friendly stranger with no idea who any of these people crowded around him were because he had given all of it away to save them. And there is an irony in the instrument of that loss that I have to name, because it closes one of the most careful circles in the whole story. The memory gun that erased Stan is the same device that ruined McGucket. The machine the inventor built to forget his own trauma and then overused until it destroyed his mind. The tool of the saddest tragedy becomes the tool of the greatest salvation. The device that took a genius apart is the device that takes the demon apart, and it takes the con man's mind along with it as the price. Nothing here is disposable, and nothing is single-edged. The memory gun is horror and rescue in the same object, damage and deliverance fired from the same barrel, and it is allowed to be both at once because that is closer to how the world actually works than any cleaner symbol would be. But here is the thing, and it is the reason the ending is not despair, and it is the reason I keep returning to McGucket as the quiet key to all of it. We learned earlier from McGucket's own recovery that the memory gun's damage is not necessarily permanent, that a mind erased can be a mind restored if the lost memories are patiently presented back to it, if the person is surrounded by the people and the things that made them who they were. And that is exactly what happens to Stan. His family does not give up on him. They bring out the scrapbook, the photographs, the accumulated evidence of a life, and Mabel above all, the emotional twin, the one who understands that the people are the point, works to bring her Grunkle back to himself, memory by memory, moment by moment, and slowly it works. Stan begins to remember. The blank stranger begins to fill back in with the man he was, drawn home by love and by the patient representation of everything he lost. It is McGucket's redemption played a second time, on a larger stage, with the whole family as the cure. And that final movement is the deepest statement about intelligence in the whole show, deeper than any cipher or plan, so let me say it plainly. What saves Stan is not a smart plan. It is love, applied patiently over time by people who refuse to let him go. His memories come back not because someone solved a puzzle, but because someone loved him enough to keep showing him who he was until he believed it again. The same force that broke the wheel, the human heart with all its stubbornness and pride, is also the force that repairs the man the demon's defeat nearly destroyed. The story gives with one hand what it takes with the other, and it insists, right to the end, that the thing that matters is not how clever you are, but who stays with you when your cleverness is gone. Stan lost every smart thing about himself, every con and every secret and every hard-won skill, and he was still worth saving, still himself in the ways that counted, because the people around him decided he was. There is one more layer to Stan's sacrifice that I find almost unbearably moving, and it is the way it inverts his whole life. Stan spent 30 years erasing himself, in a sense, living under his brother's name, hiding his real identity, giving up being Stanley so that the world would think he was Stanford and leave him free to work. He had already practiced disappearing. He had already spent decades being someone he was not, for love, in secret, at enormous personal cost. So when the moment came to give up his mind entirely, to erase the last of himself to save everyone, it was not a break from who he was. It was the final, total version of what he had been doing all along. Stan's whole life was a long act of self-erasure in service of his family, and the memory gun was just the last and largest instance of it. The con man's greatest con in the end was convincing the universe to take him instead of the people he loved, and he ran it perfectly, and it nearly cost him everything. And the only thing that brought him back was that the people he had spent his life protecting refused to let the con be the end of him. That, more than any plan or prophecy, is the smartest and truest thing in Gravity Falls. Not the Ciphers, brilliant as they are, not the genius, real as it is, but the recognition, arrived at through 2 seasons of clever mysteries, that the point of all the cleverness was always the people it was protecting, and that a mind is worth nothing without someone who loves it enough to bring it home. So let me try to pull the whole night together gently, because we have traveled a long way through this show's intelligence, and it is worth pausing to see the shape of what it all adds up to. We started by naming the different kinds of smart that live in Gravity Falls: the academic genius, the deductive detective, the street smart con man, the emotional reader of hearts, and the manipulative demon. And I said the story was authentically curious about which one wins, and that the answer would surprise you. Now we are standing at the end, and we can say what the answer is. The academic genius loses. Ford, the smartest man in the cast by any conventional measure, the holder of a reported 12 doctorates, is the one who builds the doorway that nearly ends the world, because his brilliance was lonely, and his loneliness made him easy to flatter, and his pride made him slow to see the trap. His intelligence is real and vast, and again, the source of the catastrophe rather than the solution to it. The story admires his mind and refuses to trust it, and that refusal is deliberate. The manipulative demon loses too, and loses hardest, because his intelligence has no floor of humility under it at all. Bill can read every mind in existence except his own. And that single blindness, the inability to imagine that he could be outplayed by the mortals he despises, is what walks him straight into a con man's oldest trick and a dying man's fists. He is proof that raw cognitive power, unmoored from any capacity to doubt itself, is not a strength but a fatal weakness dressed up as one. The deductive detective, the boy we might most easily call smart, does not win alone either. Dipper is brilliant and brave, and his hunger to know drives half the plots, but his intelligence keeps leading him and the people he loves into danger. And at the crucial moments, it is not his deduction that saves the day. It is his sister. Dipper's arc is not the triumph of the clever kid. It is the education of the clever kid, the slow lesson that his gift is only safe when it is joined to something his gift cannot provide on its own. And what does win over and over when the smart plans fail and the geniuses falter and the prophecy breaks is the least prestigious kind of intelligence in the whole hierarchy, the kind the culture ranks lowest. The con man's cunning pointed at love instead of profit, the sister's reading of hearts, the handyman's steadiness, the willingness to sacrifice, which is not an act of intellect at all. 2 seasons dazzle you with codes and geniuses and clever mysteries, and then it softly concludes that the highest form of intelligence in this universe is the one that knows what all the cleverness is for. And that is not a form of thinking. It is a form of loving. The smartest thing anyone does in Gravity Falls is give themselves up for the people they love, and no genius in the show can do it, and a con man does it without hesitating because he understood something the geniuses never did. I do not want to flatten this into an anti-intelligence message because that is not what the story is saying, and it would be a betrayal of everything the ciphers and the foreshadowing and the layered design stand for. Gravity Falls is not telling you that being smart is bad or that feeling is better than thinking. It is a piece of work that rewards intelligence lavishly, that hides real cryptography in its credits and trusts you to solve it, that respects its audience enough to make them detectives. It loves the mind. What it is telling you, I think, is subtler and truer than any simple ranking. It is telling you that intelligence is a tool, and that a tool is only as good as the hand that holds it and the purpose it is turned to, and that the same brilliance can build a doorway to the apocalypse or rescue a brother from across the dimensions depending entirely on the love behind it. The mind is not the problem, and it is not the answer. It is the instrument. The love is what decides what song it plays. And there is a reason a con man was chosen to carry that truth across the finish line, rather than one of the more obvious geniuses, because the con man's whole life is a study in the gap between being clever and being wise. Stan spent decades being clever in the smallest, most self-serving ways, running grifts, fudging books, squeezing tourists, and none of that cleverness ever made his life anything but lonely. It was only when he pointed the exact same set of skills, the impersonation, the patience, the willingness to deceive, at something larger than himself, at bringing his brother home, at saving the children, that his cleverness became something worth having. The tools did not change. The purpose did. And you are made to see that the same con man's mind that ran cheap scams in the early episodes is the mind that fools a god and sacrifices itself at the end. Because the point is not the intelligence, it never was. The point is what you decide to aim it at. That is the quiet inversion the whole series is built to deliver. And it is why the ranking of the geniuses never really settles anything. Because Gravity Falls is not interested in who has the most raw processing power. It is interested in who knows what to do with it. Bill has more of it than anyone and does the most harm. Ford has almost as much and spends 30 years paying for a single misuse of it. The people who come out the other side whole are the ones who kept their intelligence, however much or little of it they had, tethered to something outside themselves. Tethered to a brother, tethered to a sister, tethered to a family, a town, a summer worth saving. Untethered intelligence, the story says over and over, is the most dangerous thing in the world, and the danger scales with the brilliance, so that the smartest untethered mind, the triangle in the top hat, is also the most catastrophic. The safety is never in the size of the mind, it is in what the mind is bound to. And that is why it holds up to the obsessive re-watching it invites, why people are still decoding it and arguing about it and hunting its ciphers years after it ended. Because underneath the puzzle box, underneath all that dazzling cleverness, it is making an argument that most stories for children are too timid to make, which is that being smart will not save you, that the sharpest people in any room are often the loneliest and the most easily fooled, and that the thing that actually saves you in the end is the far quieter intelligence of knowing who you love and being willing to lose everything for them. It buries that argument under 40 episodes of jokes and monsters and real cryptography, and it trusts you to decode it the same way it trusts you to decode the credits, patiently over time, until one day you realize the whole thing was a love story wearing the mask of a mystery, and that the mask was the smartest disguise of all. There is one more kind of intelligence in Gravity Falls that I have been saving, because it is the hardest to talk about and the easiest to miss, and it is the intelligence of the story about time. Underneath all the codes and the geniuses and the monsters, this is a story about a single summer, and about the fact that summers end. Dipper and Mabel are 12 when they arrive in Gravity Falls, on the cusp of 13, standing right at the edge of childhood, and there is a subtle, aching awareness that everything happening to them is temporary, that the summer will end, that they will grow up, that the particular magic of being a child on the brink of not being one anymore cannot be held onto no matter how badly you want to. And the deepest cleverness of the whole thing is the way it hides that melancholy under the adventure so that you do not fully feel it until it is nearly over. Because when you step back, the two central obsessions of the two central children are both, at bottom, about the same fear. Dipper cannot stop trying to know things, cannot leave a mystery alone, and part of that is a boy trying to master a world that is about to get much bigger and more frightening than a summer in Oregon. And Mabel cannot stop trying to keep things exactly as they are, cannot bear the thought of the summer ending or her brother growing away from her. And part of her whole sunny, relentless joy is a child pressing her hands against a door she knows is going to open whether she wants it to or not. The mystery and the sweetness are two children's two different defenses against the same thing, which is the end of childhood, and the story knows it, and it lets that knowledge sit under everything without ever quite saying it out loud until the final stretch. And this is where the obsession with hidden knowledge turns at the very end into something almost unbearably tender, because the last mystery, the one under all the others, is the one nobody can solve and nobody wants to. You cannot decode your way out of growing up. There is no cipher for it, no journal entry that explains how to keep a summer from ending or a childhood from closing. The smartest characters, for all their brilliance, are as helpless in front of that as anyone, and the story is honest about it. Ford's genius cannot give the twins back the years he lost or slow the ones they are living. Bill's power over time and reality is a nightmare, not a gift. The one-time machine only teaches the children that some things should not be undone. Against the passing of time, all the intelligence in Gravity Falls is powerless. And I think all that cleverness is placed in the foreground precisely so that you will feel, in the background, the one problem no cleverness can touch. That, to me, is the melancholy core the whole thing is built around, and it is why it lands so much harder than a summer cartoon has any right to. Underneath the puzzle box and the ciphers and the demon and the geniuses, Gravity Falls is a story about a boy and a girl having the last real summer of their childhood, surrounded by people they will not always have, in a place they will have to leave. And it dresses that quiet grief up in the most dazzling mystery it can build so that children can watch it and feel the wonder while the sadness sits patiently underneath, waiting for them to be old enough to feel it too. It is the same trick as the ciphers. The surface is complete and joyful on its own. The deeper layer is there for whoever is ready for it, and it does not force itself on anyone. But once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it, and the show becomes something much more than the sum of its clever parts. And that is the real reason the smartest thing in Gravity Falls is not any single moment of genius, not the ciphers or the plans or the reveals, remarkable as all of those are. The real intelligence is the wisdom underneath the cleverness, the grown-up understanding that a childhood is a thing you cannot keep, that the people you love are temporary, that the summer ends, and that the only sane response to all of that is not to solve it, because it cannot be solved, but to love the people in front of you while you have them. That is what Mabel knew from the first day. That is what Stan proved with everything he gave up. That is the answer the whole enormous machine of mysteries and codes was built, patiently to deliver. Be here. Love them now. The summer is ending, and no amount of cleverness will stop it. and that is exactly why the time you have inside it matters so much. It never says that to your face. It is far too smart for that. It buries it the way it buries everything, under a triangle and a talking pig and a stack of journals and 40 episodes of the best foreshadowing anyone has ever hidden in a cartoon. And it trusts you the way it always trusted you to dig down and find it on your own. I want to spend the last real stretch of the night on what happened after, on the way the show has lived in the world since it ended, because a story's intelligence is not only in the thing itself but in what it leaves behind. And Gravity Falls left behind something unusual. Most cartoons, even beloved ones, fade into fond memory. They become the thing you loved as a kid, warm and a little blurry, revisited rarely. This did not fade like that. It became an object of ongoing study, a thing people keep returning to not just to feel the old feelings but to actively work at, to decode, to argue about, to discover new things in years after the last episode aired. It has an afterlife more like a puzzle than like a show, and that is entirely by design because it was built to reward exactly that kind of return. Part of that is the tie-in material, which extended the puzzle past the screen. Alex Hirsch published an actual book, the third journal, the very object Dipper carries through the series, produced as a real thing you could hold, complete with the hidden ink and the coded notes and the layered secrets, so that the fiction leaked out into your hands. There have been further books and supplements that deepen the lore, that fill in corners of the world the series only gestured at, and the fandom has treated all of it the way Dipper treats the journals, as material to be studied, cross-referenced, and decoded. The story did not just end and leave you with memories, it handed you homework, and it made the homework a pleasure, and people are still doing it. But the deeper reason it endures, I think, is the thing we have circled all night, which is that it respected its audience's intelligence at a moment when very little made for children did. It assumed you were smart. It assumed you would notice the symbols in the background and want to decode the credits and freeze frame the strange details and dig for the layer underneath. And a whole generation of viewers grew up inside that assumption, grew up being treated as detectives and cryptographers and collaborators rather than as passive consumers, and that does something to a person. It teaches a habit of attention. It teaches you to distrust the surface and look for the hidden layer, to believe that the details reward scrutiny, that the blank page might have writing on it if you find the right light. And it is not an exaggeration to say the show trained a generation in a certain way of paying attention to stories, a certain expectation that the things they love should have depth worth digging for. There is a real cultural weight to that, and I want to state it plainly and neutrally without overclaiming. Gravity Falls sits now as one of the small number of animated shows from its era that people talk about as sincerely, structurally intelligent, as a story that repaid obsessive analysis with real answers rather than empty mystery. It is held up as a model of how to build a mystery box and then actually open it, how to plant clues and then pay them off, how to end a story on purpose rather than letting it rot. Creators who came after it cite it. Viewers who grew up on it hold later shows to the standard it set. Its reputation has, if anything, grown since it ended, which is the rarest kind of afterlife a show can have, the kind where the audience keeps discovering that it was even smarter than they realized the first time. The part of that legacy I find loveliest, the thing that ties the whole afterlife back to the beating heart of the story, is this. The activity it inspired, the decoding and the theorizing and the collaborative digging, is almost never solitary. It happens in communities. People pool what they find, share their decodings, build on each other's theories, and in the case of the great real-world scavenger hunt, physically work together to solve a puzzle no one could solve alone. The story that argued in its finale that intelligence is at its best when it is shared, that the smart plan requires the whole community holding hands, produced exactly that kind of shared intelligence in its own audience. Its afterlife is a living demonstration of its own thesis. The fans did not just watch a show about collective cleverness and mutual love, they became a collective, and they turned their cleverness on the show together, and in doing so they proved it right about the thing it cared about most. That is about as much as any story can hope for, honestly, not just to be watched and enjoyed and forgotten, but to change in some small and real way how the people who loved it move through the world, to leave them a little more attentive, a little more willing to look for the hidden layer, a little more inclined to solve things together rather than alone. Gravity Falls did that. It hit a masterpiece under a summer cartoon, it trusted its audience to find it, and its audience found it and kept finding it, and is finding it still. The smartest moments in the end are not only the ones inside the story, they are the ones the story created out here, in the people who grew up decoding it and who learned, from a triangle and a stack of enciphered credits, that the world rewards those who bother to look closely and that the looking is so much better done together. So that is the whole of it. The intelligence of Gravity Falls, from the codes in the credits, to the con in the basement, to the sacrifice in the dissolving mind, and underneath all of it, the quiet wisdom that all the cleverness was only ever in service of the people, and the summer and the love that outlasts them both. Before we close, I want to return one last time to the two characters who bookend the whole argument about the mind, because the relationship between them is, I think, the smartest piece of characterization in the entire series, and it is easy to walk past. Dipper and Ford are the same person, separated by decades. That is not a theory, it is something the story goes out of its way to make you feel. When Dipper finally meets the author he has spent the whole series chasing, he does not just meet his hero. He meets a grown-up version of himself, and the show is discreetly asking him, and you, whether that is a future to want, because they really are alike, and the writing is precise about it. Both are brilliant, obsessive, curious past the point of safety. Both trust their own minds more than they trust other people. Both are drawn to mysteries the way a moth is drawn to a flame, unable to leave a locked door unopened, unable to let a question lie. When Ford looks at Dipper, he sees the boy he used to be, and he is drawn to him, wants to mentor him, wants to pour everything he knows into a young mind that finally understands him the way no one has in decades. And when Dipper looks at Ford, he sees the man he could become, a genius, an adventurer, the author of the very book that has been his Bible all summer. It is the most flattering mirror a lonely, clever boy could ever be handed. And here is where the story does something deeply wise, because it does not let the mirror stay flattering. The longer Dipper spends around Ford, the more he sees the cost of that life, not just the adventure and the knowledge, but the loneliness underneath it. The burned bridges, the decades of isolation, the brother pushed away, the price a man pays for loving his own mind more than the people around him. Ford is what happens to a Dipper who never learns the lesson. He is brilliance that curdled into solitude, curiosity that ate everything else in the life around it. And he is placed in front of Dipper not as a hero to emulate, but as a warning to heed. A living portrait of where an unchecked hunger for knowledge can lead, all the way to a doorway that nearly ends the world and a family shattered for 30 years. So the real test at the end for Dipper is not a monster or a puzzle. It is a choice about what kind of intelligence he wants his to become. He can follow Ford, follow the mind, follow the endless pursuit of answers wherever it leads, and become the smartest and loneliest version of himself. Or he can hold on to the thing Ford let go of, the bond with the person who loves him most, his sister, the other half of him, the emotional intelligence his analytical mind cannot survive without. And the whole show, every clue and every reveal, has been arguing toward the second choice, because it has shown you again and again that the first one is a trap, that a mind left to itself becomes a danger to everyone around it, that the geniuses who cut themselves off from love are the ones who build the doorways to catastrophe. I find the mirror of Dipper and Ford almost unbearably moving, because it is the story being honest about its own hero. It would have been so easy to let Dipper's cleverness be an unqualified virtue, to make his mind the thing that saves the day and leave it there. Instead, the fully grown version of that mind is held up, and the story says, look closely, this is where it goes. If you're not careful, this brilliant, lonely, haunted man is the destination of pure intelligence unbalanced by love. And it lets the boy see it and lets him choose, and the choosing is the point. The smartest thing Dipper ever does is not a deduction. It is recognizing in the reflection of an old man who is also himself which parts of his own mind to trust and which parts to keep on a leash, and choosing the sister over the solitude, the connection over the endless mystery. That, in the end, is the quietest smart moment of all, and it is the one the entire mirror was built to deliver. A boy looks at the smartest possible version of himself, sees the loneliness under the genius, and decides he would rather be loved than be right. Ford never made that choice in time, and it cost him everything, and by the end he knows it, and the tenderness of the story is that it gives the old genius a second family anyway, a chance to be less alone than his brilliance had made him. but it makes sure the boy learns the lesson early, while it can still shape a life, so that this dipper, the one we watched all summer, will not have to lose 30 years to learn what his great-uncle learned too late. The smartest mind in the next generation gets to keep the thing the smartest mind in the last one threw away. And that, more than any cipher, is the story handing its audience the one piece of wisdom it most wanted them to carry out the door. And so we come to the end of the night, and it is worth taking a slow breath here and letting the whole thing settle. The way the town of Gravity Falls settled back into ordinariness after the sky healed and the strangeness drained away. What is left, when you turn all of it over, is a show that arrived pretending to be a small thing, a summer cartoon on a children's channel, and turned out to be one of the most carefully built stories anyone has made for young people. A thing full of real codes and real grief and a real argument about what it means to be smart. It ran for only 2 summers on the screen, 40 episodes and a handful of shorts, and it packed into that small space more hidden intelligence than shows 3 times its length ever manage. And then, understanding its own lesson better than most of its characters ever did, it chose to end while it was still whole. I keep thinking, as the lights go down, about how much of the cleverness was pointed in the end at something so gentle. All that cryptography, all those geniuses, all those layered mysteries and foreshadowed reveals, and the thing it was all quietly building toward was a family choosing each other, a con man giving up his mind for the people he loved, a boy deciding he would rather be loved than be right, a girl who understood from the first day that the summer was about each other and not about the answers. The story dressed its tenderness in the smartest disguise it could find, and it trusted a generation of children to grow up and decode it. And they did, and they are decoding it still, together, out in the world, years after the last credits rolled. There is something in that I find plainly comforting, and it feels like the right note to drift off on. Because the story believed, all the way down, that the world rewards attention, that a page that looks empty is holding writing for anyone who finds the right light, that the details matter and the effort is repaid and the puzzle is worth solving. And it believed just as deeply that the point of all that looking was never the answers themselves, but the people you look alongside, the ones who stay with you, the ones who bring you home when your cleverness is gone. That is a kind and a wise thing for a story to leave behind, and it is why Gravity Falls has lasted, and why it will keep lasting without much fuss in the corner of the culture where the smartest things tend to live, waiting patiently for the next tired viewer to shine a light on it. So let the town go dark now. Let the Mystery Shack close up for the night. Let the journals sit unopened on their shelf. Let the codes rest in the credits where they have always waited. You do not need to solve anything else tonight. You have followed the smartest moments in a very smart show all the way to their quiet, tender end, and there is nothing left to decode, only the soft dark and the sound of my voice trailing off, and the small good feeling of having spent a couple of hours in the company of a story that respected your mind and cared about your heart in equal measure. Rest easy, the summer is over, and that is all right. It was always going to be, and it was beautiful because of it. Thank you for spending this long night here with me, drifting through the ciphers and the geniuses and the con at the bottom of it all. If you made it this far, whether you are still awake or already halfway into sleep, I hope it did what it was meant to do and carried you somewhere calm. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.